Good afternoon. Before we start our agenda, there is a presentation by the New York City Department of Homeless Services here to tell us about the work that they're doing. Jeff will load the... There you go.
Yes.
Come up.
Yes. So I'm assuming I just push this button.
Well, it'll load.
Okay.
You can introduce yourself.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori Boozer, and I'm the Special Advisor for the Department of Social Services, Government Relations and External Affairs Department. I am going to work with Mr. Aaron Goodman, who is Senior Deputy Counsel for the agency, and we will do what we hope is not a too long presentation on the Turning the Tide plan and give you an opportunity to ask us any questions that you might have about the work that DHS is doing currently. So just a quick survey. Does anyone have any familiarity with the plan other than what we're about to talk about today? Great, Michelle does. This plan was undertaken after the mayor commenced a 90-day review of the shelter system in New York City back in 2016. And the findings from that review sort of drove the impetus for what we have now, which is this Turning the Tide plan. So if you're familiar with the agency at all, our overall mission is to provide temporary emergency shelter when needed. A lot of times we are confused with HPD. We go out into communities and there's an expectation that DHS is building affordable housing. We don't build affordable housing. We only are building shelters in an attempt to meet capacity needs that are driven by individuals who are currently coming into our shelter system on a daily basis. How we got to this place of building shelters and having a shelter system in New York City really sort of goes back to the fact that New York City is a right to shelter city. And so our Constitution, the state Constitution, actually says that the aid, care, and support of the needy are public concerns and shall be provided by the state and by such of its subdivisions. And then there were a series of lawsuits that happened in New York City where the right to shelter was established. So Callahan v. Carey established the right to shelter for single men. Eldridge v. Koch extended that right to single women, and then McCain v. Koch, Boston v. City of New York, extended that right even further to families. And so we're sort of in a unique position as a city in that we don't have an option to not provide shelter. We have an obligation to provide shelter. And so a lot of the work that you see us undertaking is really an attempt to meet what is an ever-changing capacity need. And so on any given night, if individuals are coming into our system, we have to have spaces available for those individuals. And what you'll see as we go through this presentation is that the way that we've dealt with that in the past is to rely on stopgap measures such as hotels and cluster sites as opposed to a more traditional shelter setting because we haven't had the shelter capacity that we've needed. And so at the heart of this plan is really an attempt to get us away from the stopgap measures and to focus more on building appropriate shelter capacity so that we can meet those needs. So the rise of homelessness, there's been about a 115% increase in homelessness over the past 2 decades. So from 23,868 men, women, and children in January of 1994 to 31,000 in 2002, and then to 51,000 in 2014. And in 2018, we're hovering roughly at a 60,000 or so shelter census. So you can see that over time, there's been a dramatic increase in the number of individuals that have been coming into the shelter system. Roughly 70% of this system consists of families with children. And so a lot of what we encounter as an agency when we go out into the community is really this misconception that the street homeless individual that we see in the subway or on a park bench is representative of what it means to be homeless here in New York City. That's actually not true. roughly 3,000 or so individuals are street homeless. The bulk of our system consists of families with children. And within that number, about 34% of those families with children have an adult who is working. And so if you think one step further with that, we have individuals in our system who are homeless and employed. And so there's also sort of an income inequality aspect to how this problem is unfolding in the city. In terms of what is driving homelessness in the city, we're looking at really four main drivers. Eviction, so obviously people who are coming into housing court for various reasons, can't pay rent, and the landlord has sued them to repossess the apartment and they end up coming into our system. Income inequality, which I just touched on, so not making enough of an income to support a family and to pay what we know are very high rent costs in New York City that continue to rise. Domestic violence, which I think is a driver that not most people think about, but I believe it's actually the biggest driver within our system, and that we have individuals coming from situations of discord where they're entering the shelter system for safety. And then overcrowding. So we have individuals who are in situations where they're doubled up. Mom doesn't want their adult child to stay with them anymore. The adult child has two children in a one-bedroom apartment. And so at some point, these individuals come into the shelter system looking for a way to sort of establish their own path to permanency, and obviously not having had the means before coming into our system to really do that. So when we talk about the loss of affordable housing, we know that between 1994 and 2012, the city suffered a net loss of about 150,000 rent-stabilized units. And those units, if you're familiar with the rent stabilization laws, are highly protected. And so to lose such a large chunk of that affordable housing stock in a situation where there's already income inequality is obviously going to exacerbate homelessness and individuals' inability to find access to affordable housing. By 2015, the city had only half the housing it needed for about 3 million low-income New Yorkers. So that's a significant affordable housing conundrum that I think the city is trying to solve through our sister agency, HPD, and the mayor's affordable housing plan. But on the DHS end of things, it means that as individuals are unable to find this affordable housing, they're more likely to enter our system looking for shelter. Between 2005 and 2015, rents increased by 18.4%, incomes only by 4.8%. So that's a huge disparity right there. Roughly 360,000 New York City households pay more than 50% of their income on rent and utilities. We know that the suggested percentage that anyone should be paying towards rent is 30% of their income. So we're looking at a situation where in New York City, at least 360,000 people are paying half of their income to rent. Another 140,000 households pay more than 30%. So what this picture is really showing you is that the rent burdens, the income inequality, those are really some major forces that we're dealing with in terms of why individuals are coming into our shelter system. When we're out in the community, we actually try to give that context to communities so that they not only understand the fact that we're citing new shelters, but why are we having to cite these new shelters? What's really driving the issue of homelessness in the city of New York? And so that brings us to where we are today as an agency, which is the Mayor's Turning the Tide plan to address homelessness. And that plan is really a borough-by-borough approach that puts communities and people first, and the goal being to look at what we found out in that 90-day review and try to make some adjustments to improve the shelter system across the board. So improving services, improving quality of the facilities themselves, and also acknowledging that in the past, individuals may have been shuffled all over the city. So if a person, let's say, had an apartment in the Bronx, they could end up in a shelter in Brooklyn. And we didn't really account for the fact that their network, their support network, may still have been in the Bronx. And so in order to get an individual back to a place of stability, connecting them and making sure that that network is still in place is a large part of that. And this plan is really taking that into consideration. And so there's really been 4 prongs or 4 pillars to what Turning the Tide represents. And I know that when we spoke to, I guess, what would be my counterparts that go out into the community on behalf of CPC, this was sort of the crux of what we wanted them to be able to take away from that presentation. And so the 4 pillars are Homestat, which is the aspect of turning the tide that really looks at street homelessness and tries to make sure that we can connect those individuals with services to move them from the street into a bed. Prevention, which really looks at how do we get people to not enter our system? What is it that we can do before family, before an individual comes into PATH or an intake center? And even at the point of them entering an intake center, is there any way for us to divert them back to a place of permanency? A lot of times we find that there is, and the prevention work really helps us to do that. And then rehousing is sort of looking at the vouchers that we have available to us, which we'll talk about a little later, to help individuals sort of bridge the gap where there is that income inequality. So maybe a family or an individual cannot afford market rent, but with the help of a voucher or some sort of subsidy assistance, they can be able to move into a permanent apartment. And then changing the way that we do business with shelter in general. So really looking at security, service provision, increasing our commitment to things like employment opportunities, and just overall making sure that our clients have what they need to be able to transition back into permanent housing. And so the first pillar is prevention. We look at increasing access to home-based services and implementing universal access to legal services, which are really the 2 prime components of prevention. So home-based is, I don't know if you all are familiar with what home-based is, but home-based are these community-based organizations that sort of provide really intensive case management to individuals who are at risk of eviction or imminently may be at some point about to lose their homes. And so when a client is about to enter the shelter system, they can be diverted to a home base, and home base might be able to help them prevent the eviction, get access to public assistance benefits, any emergency rental assistance, education and job placement assistance, financial counseling, money management, help finding an apartment, any sort of short-term financial assistance to be able to help this family not enter the shelter system. And this map geographically by color just sort of shows you where different offices are located. So the green is Queens. They're located throughout the borough. And really, we try to make sure through our HRA counterparts and through the HRA side of what we do, individuals sort of are ushered into their local home base as much as possible. And then if you're familiar with universal access to counsel here in New York City, the mayor really championed this along with lots of community organizations. I know for years this has really been a fight, and we finally have it where individuals who are facing eviction in housing court have access to right to counsel. And so what that has allowed us to do is save roughly 70,000 New Yorkers and help them stay in their homes. And so essentially, if you're familiar with housing court, a person would get an eviction notice, they go into housing court, 9 times out of 10, an attorney would, a landlord would have an attorney. And so there would be some lopsided sort of casework going on where the landlord was represented, the tenant was not, and the tenant would lose their home in situations where if there was intervention or representation, they may not have lost their home. And so with the right to counsel, that allows us through funding to give individuals coming into housing court access to counsel, and then 70,000 New Yorkers able to stay in their homes between 2014 and 2017. Imagine a 60,000 census number if we didn't have this, how many more individuals would have lost their homes and been coming into the shelter system. So this is a huge component of the work that not so much happens on the DHS side, but on the HRA side in terms of the prevention that we do. The second pillar is Homestat, so bringing people in from the street. Again, I know that I think most people's experience, if you're not working for the city, is that homelessness is the person you see in the train station. It's the most visible idea that we have of what it means to be homeless, but that's not the bulk of what we do. But what we do know is that individuals who are on the street are specialized case, and we work with them in a very different way. And so through Homestat, what we've done is double the number of outreach staff canvassing the streets. So anytime you or anyone else sees someone in a train station, we would always recommend that you pull up 311 app or you call 311. You can say, hey, I see a gentleman in the train. He doesn't have shoes. He's home. I think he's homeless. And within an hour, our providers who do our street outreach will be dispatched to try to identify that individual and see if we can connect them with services. That is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year that we are doing that work. The thing that is the takeaway is that it takes multiple points of contact to build relationships almost on a daily basis to be able to encourage these individuals to come in from the street. And so it's a very different process. It's very labor intensive. And so I always say this when we do this presentation: if you've reported something to 311 and you see the same person there the next week or the next day, it's not that we haven't reached out to that individual, but it's that it will take multiple points of contact to get this individual to trust us and to accept services. And so that's a very different process, but we've invested significantly in trying to make sure that we're improving that process. And in terms of what we do when someone is street homeless, we try to bring them into a bed. And so we've doubled and have committed to tripling the number of low threshold transitional beds. So within our system, we have traditional shelter, actual buildings where we will place individuals. We also have something called safe havens, which are lower threshold beds where there may not be curfews. Some of the rules are a bit different to encourage individuals who are not as comfortable to be in a permanent setting to come inside and at least accept a bed. And so we've committed to doubling and tripling the number of those beds that we have available. And then over the course of this administration, we will also increase those beds by 600 to 1,800. So that's a big increase in terms of moving from 600 to 1,800, just in recognizing that we want to be able to have more beds available for individuals who we need to bring in from the street and hopefully have a place for them to go. Once they come in, we continue to work with them just as we would work with any other client to see if we can transition them into permanent housing. And so with the Homestat program, the city has helped 1,480 people transition off the streets into transitional programs or permanent housing. That's a significant number of individuals over the course of the program that we've been able to move in from the street. The third pillar, which I think is the thing everyone gets excited about, is rehousing, but we don't build housing. But what we do is offer rental assistance and rehousing programs with incentives for landlords to try to encourage them to work with our clients. I'm sure everyone is familiar with Advantage and the fiasco that was when those vouchers were basically snatched from under people's feet. That contributed to an influx in our system and obviously impacted people's ability to stay in their home. And so with the current vouchers that we have, we're able to sort of reestablish that work. But the damage done to our relationships with landlords because of what happened to Advantage is obviously something that we're constantly trying to overcome. And then we've also developed a source of income unit unique to HRA, which is different from what we see with the Commission on Human Rights. And I'll talk a little bit more about how these two things work in tandem and how what we do is different from what the Commission does. And so in terms of rental assistance, vouchers, and programs that we have at our disposal, we work with LINK, which is Living in Communities. Those are for clients who are coming out of shelter. FEPs and city FEPs you see traditionally being given to individuals facing eviction. So at the point of eviction, we try to step in and connect them to a FEPS or a city FEPS voucher to keep them in their apartment. Same with SEPs, which I think applies more to single individuals and not families. And in Section 8 through HPD, we still have some individuals who get vouchers through that program. In terms of move-outs, we've moved out 29,768 households, consisting of roughly 81,124 individuals. So that means that over the course of turning the tide up to this point, 29,000 households have been connected to permanent affordable housing, and what we hope will be permanent, and that we will work with them to stay in these apartments. And then source of income discrimination is a huge factor. So because of advantage, because of ignorance, for a whole host of reasons, landlords often don't want to accept clients who are coming to them with these vouchers to get apartments. And traditionally, individuals would go to the Commission on Human Rights, and they still can, to try to file a complaint and say that I went to this apartment with a voucher, the landlord said he doesn't want me, and then a complaint could be filed. What we've done on the HRA side is to sort of form our own unit, which is a little bit more nuanced in that we are able to sort of jump in at the point when the apartment is about to be lost and potentially intercede and have conversations with landlords to explain the law to them, let them know they can be fined or have complaints filed against them, and potentially get them to work with our clients, which is a bit different from the way that the commission operates. And so just quickly, lawful source of income includes any federal, state, or local public or housing assistance towards the payment of rent. So any of the things you see listed here, when our clients go out into the field to look for apartments, if they come back and say, Joe doesn't want my voucher, they can call our office, our hotline directly, and we can try to work with them to prevent that from happening. The other thing that I always get excited about with us having this internally is that our department can actually look into the HRA system and see where other clients live with vouchers, which is something that the commission can't do. And so let's say if a building had 3 other tenants who currently had vouchers, and they said no to this tenant, we would be able to make the argument that, well, we already know that we pay for 3 other tenants to be in this building. You know, what's happening here? This is a way of discriminating against this tenant. And so those are some of the nuances that sort of make what we do a little bit different than the commission. And then the 4th pillar is really sort of transforming the approach to shelter and services. So I think this is the place where our work sort of overlaps the most, and that's that we're trying to get out of clusters and commercial hotels, which is what the city has used because we've lacked that traditional shelter capacity. So we go into clusters, which are essentially apartments, and then hotels. Obviously, we rent out rooms in hotels to place families because we need a place to place them. And so we want to be able to move away from that. And then in addition to that, we've looked at sort of maintenance, security, and services at our sites to see how we can continue to make improvements. And so in terms of phasing out of these stopgap measures, we've reduced so far by 42%. 800 of our cluster sites were converted back into affordable housing. And so we've been able to put that back into the housing market. And we're continuing to close down clusters until 2021 at the point where we hope to have no more clusters in use and have built enough shelter capacity to be able to meet our needs as an agency. And now we've also started something called the Shelter Repair Squad. So the Shelter Repair Squad has undertaken over 34,000 inspections across 2016 and 17 to reduce the number of open violations within traditional shelters. So clients will often come and they'll complain and they'll talk about their living conditions. And I think what we've done as an agency to address that is to really create this squad and try to find a way to make sure that we have our clients living in the best conditions possible. Additionally, over $200 million in city funding has been allocated to make renovations and repairs to our existing facilities. So we're committed as an agency to improving the infrastructure of our shelter system, making sure that we're placing families and children in conditions that are living appropriate. In terms of security, which is always a big issue, we have enhanced our training and oversight by partnering with NYPD. I won't read through all of this, but the crux of it is that NYPD does the oversight for our shelter system in terms of security. They review our security plans. They train our peace officers who are staffed at our mental health facilities, and have really partnered with us to sort of make sure that we're providing the best security possible at our sites. and then providing a career pathway. So in terms of the service piece, there are many things that we're doing for that, but I wanted to just highlight employment and training because we talk about income inequality, and one of the ways that we overcome that as a city is making sure that individuals who are coming out of our system have an access to adequate employment and education opportunities to be able to earn more and support themselves and their families. So the new model expands on some changes that HRA had previously made, where we're trying to make sure that we're not sanctioning people's public assistance cases, but that we're partnering with them to make sure that they can attend training classes and have access to any employment skills or job readiness training that they would need to go out into the job market. So one thing I did want to talk about that's not in the slide is we also have sort of made this huge commitment to community engagement. And so my team, we sort of hired up and we have 4 borough directors where we go to each borough, we do these presentations, we work with community boards and elected officials to really talk about poverty, homelessness, the shelters that we're opening. As you can see, if you're following the news, we get tons of resistance. 58th Street doesn't like us. But we try to expand our reach in terms of where these shelters are opening, moving away from placing them only in certain communities and giving broader consideration to really changing how we look at the siting process. And so I'm not going to go into it here, but there is a document that I'll share with you that talks a little bit about how we pick different sites. It's a public-facing one-pager, and it explains for families versus single adults and single adult families, what we're looking at in terms of that siting process. The other thing that we did, which was a part of our community engagement, was that we gave every community board and elected official a letter that essentially told them to bring us sites. So since we know that siting is such a huge issue and communities are always in an uproar, we've given them an opportunity, and it literally says, if you see a piece of property or a building or something where you think a shelter can be placed and that makes the most sense for your community, you have an opportunity. You can click this link, you can go in and give us the information, and our team will investigate to figure out if it's a viable site or not. And so communities have this opportunity. None of them to date have taken us up on this offer, although they all will complain if we show up with a particular site in mind. But just for you all to know, especially as you go out and talk about the permitting aspect of the work for the hotels, I think it's important to know that we've extended that opportunity to communities. And I can also share with this gentleman what that letter looks like and the site so that you have it and can sort of read through it and see what it is about. So that's my little spiel. I hope it was helpful, and we can do some Q&A. Myself and Aaron, who knows everything about the agency and can answer questions at the drop of a dime, we're happy to help you any way that we can.
Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
First, thank you for being here. You know, someone who has worked in a shelter, who's run social services and supportive housing, and now is a nonprofit owner of affordable housing, where 35% of our units are for formerly homeless individuals and families. I think it's great that you're providing this overview. I think it's also I think really important that you started with the city's obligation to provide shelter, and that it was really Attorney Banks who won those cases. Now he gets to have to actually deal with the legislation or the court cases that he won. I think the other thing that would be helpful for the presentation, and you kind of hit on it, was that the outreach workers, unless the temperature's below freezing or someone's a potential harm to themselves or others, you can't force someone to accept services. And that's another critical piece of information that I think the general public doesn't understand. It's like, why can't they just take care of this person? Why are they still here? I think that's really important. And I guess a couple questions for you. One is, I found it interesting that the loss of rent-stabilized housing wasn't listed as a driver of homelessness. Meanwhile, on your next slide, you specifically pointed to the tremendous loss of rent-stabilized housing. I definitely view it as a driver of the increase in homelessness. I think many advocates do. And I think when you start viewing it as a driver, you start developing different strategies, which is exactly what you all have done with the other 4 areas. And then you started, I think, to answer the next question I had, which is how is the agency balancing in the siting of the new shelters, which I entirely understand, especially as you decrease the cluster sites and make repairs to the other shelters. You know, siting in communities where people have networks versus the fair share, right? Because not all communities are created equal in terms of where families are coming from or where individuals are coming from in terms of you know, entering into the shelter system. And actually, there is one other question I have, which is now with HPD's new rules that that a certain percent of the units in new affordable housing are for formerly homeless families and individuals. I foresee in the future a need for services for those families. And the new rule related to this is a new rule related to the lottery, and I don't think we know yet what may happen, but I foresee it as a need, and I'm wondering how the agency is looking at that likely need and trying to anticipate it before it becomes a problem. Because a lot of this is happening with for-profit owners who this is the first time who are doing voluntary or mandatory inclusionary housing, or it's the first time that they are actually housing lower income tenants or formerly homeless tenants. And I think in order to ensure that the private sector is a partner in this, we're gonna wanna make sure that we serve people while they're in housing to keep them stably housed.
So I feel like Aaron might best be able to answer the fair share question. I think you're referring to, so I know that we have set asides under the new 421A rules with HPD. We actually have a building currently in this situation where we have a percentage of tenants who are going to come straight from our system, and then the other percentage of the building will be used for shelter. To my knowledge, we've not made any commitments in terms of forward-facing discussion about service provision to families who are going to be in the apartment aspect of those properties. It hasn't been sort of a part of any of the discussions that we've had, in part because I think it's still fairly new, and I think we're still trying to get through the aspects of having the populations even live in the same building. Because if you can imagine, even just from a psychological standpoint, if someone was formerly homeless and you're telling them they're getting an apartment and the apartment is still in a shelter, right? And so I think we're sort of, for the set-asides, if we're talking about the same thing, the 421A rules, so I think we're sort of still trying to figure out how this is going to look. And I guess at some point, if the question comes up, and I will bring back that you asked this question, if we would consider providing, I think it's supportive services to the tenants in the building. There's not been any commitment yet on the agency's part for that, but I'm sure it will come up in discussion, and I'm happy to go back and flag it as something that we might want to start to discuss.
Thank you. My name is Aaron Goodman. I'm the Senior Deputy General Counsel for Homeless Programs at the Department of Social Services. It's a real honor to be able to present here with Lori to all of you today. And you did an excellent job in the presentation. I just wanted to also add on before I talk about fair share for just a moment, on the 421A, you know, any tenant in the city of New York, you know, regardless of income level, you know, may need assistance at certain times, navigating any variety of needs. And we have home-based programs across the city that people now can take advantage of. There have been partnerships with Single Stop and other community-based organizations. I know. Well, you know, at the backstop of all of this, you know, even when we as the agency have looked at our rental assistance programs, where we're actually assisting people to get vouchers to move into the communities. Funding is an issue as far as reimbursements and what you can do with that money and how far that money goes. Whether you want more vouchers or do you want like a lot fewer vouchers but be able to support like individualized aftercare programming. We don't have the money for that kind of individualized care, so we are using our CBOs across the city, some of which are our contracts and some of which are just community partners, to try to get that out there. And we try to provide as much information as we can about that. We've got subway campaigns, we've got bus campaigns, probably seen them around, reach out before you're pushed out. And I think that your point is great. I mean, as we increase the amount of affordable housing and even low-income housing in the city, be able to maintain that is huge. And Lori talked about the right to counsel legislation in the city. It was really vital to that. Evictions are down across the city of New York, in large part, we think, because of those kind of protections. Let me move on to briefly fair share. And I think that your question was, how do you balance the need for the fair share requirements with the desire to put people in their communities where they have their supports? And I can even add to another important point on that of school. And actually, one of our guiding principles from our state regulations and guidance is to place families with children, which is just 1/3. It's one of the three main populations that we serve, but a sizable part of our population, into shelters that are in or as close to as possible the school district of the youngest child. That is not always possible with our capacity. But it is something that we're working hard to get to. I mean, there are federal protections through McKinney-Vento that allow us to take advantage of busing across the city, and we do. As we're currently in a lot of commercial hotels, sometimes those trips are a little far. One of the goals that we're doing in building 90 shelters is to meet both of those goals that you stated. On the one hand, to put shelters more broadly across the city of New York and not have them be over-concentrated in particular neighborhoods. Some of the neighborhoods that are currently holding the largest number in proportion of shelters tend to be more lower income neighborhoods for persons of color, somewhat marginalized. And that had occurred over years through a not very purposeful overall city plan for how to construct shelters in the city of New York, and we're trying through the Turning the Tide plan to really change that. But one of the things that's going to allow us to do is to right size within our shelter system. So as we develop more capacity, I mean, right now we're really looking at a vacancy rate of about 1% to 2% per night for families with children, about 2.5% to 3% for single adults. That means that on any given night within a system that shelters 13,500 families with children, I think is right about that number, that we're talking about a couple, hundreds of vacant units, which is not a lot. And our staff work incredibly hard around the clock every night to make sure that everyone gets a shelter placement. But what we're going to be able to do as we build these shelters is we'll have more flexibility to move people within the system, so that not only for some of the new shelters that are opening, we didn't fill them up as people came through the front door. What we actually did was we opened them and then looked within our shelter system to find where people were actually living in our shelter system that were farther away from their communities of origin, that were farther away from the school districts that their children were enrolled in, and moved those families and those single adults into those shelters. And that way, and then you kind of backfill those other components elsewhere. Now, this is a work in progress, and it's going to take us some time, but that's how we are working toward that goal.
Yes, Commissioner Knight. Can you talk a little bit about the process of siting facilities in hotel properties?
Sure. So I think that there's possibly two parts of that question that I want to unpack. There's siting shelter, and then there are the renting of commercial hotel rooms. So siting shelter is done through our open-ended RFP process. The city has first promulgated, decades ago, an open-ended request for proposals. So we take in at any time, because this is a continuing need, and we are unfortunately not in a position where we think that need is going to slow down and stop, that we continue to take proposals from not-for-profit providers who could partner with developers or landlords, maybe they're buildings that they own, and make a proposal for shelter. And we can site shelter and if the buildings work out for us based on location, proximity to supports and transportation, accessibility factors, economies of scale and cost, the size of the building, et cetera. We have shelters that exist in former hotels. We have shelters that exist in former apartment buildings, in former schools, in former hospitals, in various forms of institutional settings to purpose-built shelters from the ground up. And each one serves a slightly different purpose, and some work better than others as far as the more control you have over the setting to build it, the better the programs might work. But commercial hotels more broadly, which I think was maybe where your question is going, those are not shelters. At least certainly not the way that we want shelters to exist in the city of New York. Those are permitted. Renting of hotel rooms and motel rooms are permitted by our state regulations as a means where we do not have sufficient capacity in the system to otherwise meet the demand for people who require shelter. And we're in looking for that, it is a little bit less it's not an application process, it's not a proposal process, it's not a bid process. It is actually a lot of hard workers, again, in our agency, getting on the phone and reaching out to hotel providers across the city to find out where we can take blocks of rooms and where the price is at least doable for us, even though we can acknowledge that commercial hotels are far more expensive to run than more traditional shelters. But sometimes it's kind of where you get where there's the ability to get it. We are one group of hotel guests, so to speak, competing in an open market with a surprising, a wide variety of hotel guests coming in for a variety of purposes, and people have different needs. And we also take into account, obviously building conditions of the hotels. We have to go and make sure that they would be livable for our families and our adults. There's sometimes criminal issues that arise and safety issues, either that we are aware of beforehand or that we learn of once we're in, and then we have to vacate. We're trying to be. We're trying to give at least as much of a good spread as we can around the renting of commercial hotel rooms. But again, you're somewhat limited to where those hotels exist, just as a pure matter of real estate, and where are their vacancies as we're able to take it now. As Lori said, our goal is to end our use of commercial hotels by 2023. We're trying to end use of clusters first. So commercial hotel use still may go up between now and then as a need to meet our capacity goals as we bring down clusters. But we're continuing to build new shelters, and we hope that we're going to be able to bring down that commercial hotel footprint as soon as we can.
Other questions? Yes, Vice Chair Knuckles.
I just had a question about the order of magnitude. Approximately how many people, as you can best estimate, are homeless now in New York City?
I believe the current shelter census in DHS shelters is around 58,000 right now. Last year's Hope Count had estimated about 3,600 unsheltered individuals living on the street. There are some others that are sometimes counted that live in HPD emergency shelter, but I can't remember what those numbers are at.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other questions? Well, thank you very much for the presentation. It's particularly helpful as we consider the hotel special permit. That is what had prompted the discussion. And we will welcome the follow-up that you had promised to give to Mr. Singer.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a City Planning Commission review session. Today is Monday, June 11th, 2018, and the time is 1:49. A quorum is present. The first item on the agenda is a referral of a zoning text amendment in Manhattan Community Districts 4 and 5. Our presenter today is Dylan Sandler of the Housing, Economics, and Infrastructure Planning Division.
Good afternoon. I guess I'll start while the slides are coming. There we go. So I'm Dylan Sandler. I'm a planner in the Housing, Economic, and Infrastructure Planning Division. I'm also the grandson of an accountant who worked at a men's suit manufacturing company and moved to the U.S. in 1978 to continue his career in the garment center. And so I'm It feels very fitting, and I'm very excited to be presenting a proposed text amendment to the Special Garment Center District. In addition to the zoning changes that we're proposing, there are also a number of non-zoning tools that the city has been developing related to fashion and fashion manufacturing. So I will touch on these at the end of the presentation, but the focus of the presentation today is on the zoning changes that we're considering. So I'll start by describing some of the history of the Garment Center and the zoning that has evolved over time, and then talk about the economic trends and land use in the area, and then finally go into the zoning proposal. For context, the Special Garment Center District is located in Midtown Manhattan between Broadway on the eastern edge, 9th Avenue on the western edge, and extends generally from 35th to 40th Street. So Penn Station is just to the south, Hudson Yards is to the west of the district, and the Port Authority bus terminal is at the northwest edge. Going back in time just a little bit, the Garment Center has been at the heart of apparel manufacturing and production, both in the US and internationally, for more than a century. Between 1915 and 1928, there were about 120 high-rise mercantile loft buildings constructed in this area. And by 1931, the Garment Center was home to the highest concentration of garment manufacturing in the world. However, in the decades following World War II, production began to change and move from New York to other areas of the country, to the south and the west, and later overseas to lower-cost labor markets. By the mid-1980s, people were growing concerned that real estate pressure, in part due to the redevelopment of Times Square, would lead to displacement of existing manufacturing businesses. And the city conducted a series of studies to better understand economic and land use trends in the Garment Center. These studies ultimately led to the establishment of the Special Garment Center District in 1987, with the goal of preserving apparel manufacturing and fashion-related businesses. At the time, there were approximately 61,000 people employed in the apparel industry in the area. And this included manufacturing, but also showrooms and suppliers, designers, people involved in logistics, and many others. Approximately 41% of those 61,000 jobs were in apparel manufacturing. Within the Special Garment Center District, preservation areas were created on side street blocks. The preservation areas restricted existing buildings to industrial, retail, or wholesale showrooms. Office conversion within these preservation areas was permitted only with a chair certification that an equal amount of space was preserved for garment manufacturing in perpetuity. Along the avenues, the underlying M16 zoning applied, which permits commercial office. In 2005, the Special Garment Center District was amended in conjunction with the Hudson Yards rezoning. This amendment divided the preservation areas into two areas, P1 and P2. Within P1, which are the mid-block portions of the district between Broadway and 8th Avenue, the zoning from 1987 remained unchanged. In P2, which is the mid-block area between 8th and 9th Avenues, new residential construction was now permitted as of right, as were conversions of smaller existing buildings to any use allowed by the underlying zoning district, which includes office and hotels. For larger buildings within P2, and larger buildings are defined as those greater than 70,000 square feet, conversions to office, hotel, or residential were permitted only if an equal amount of space was preserved in perpetuity for manufacturing. Alternatively, if buildings remained vacant for 3 or more years, they were permitted to change their use with a City Planning Commission authorization. Additionally, at this time in 2005, the northwest block, immediately south of the Port Authority bus terminal, was removed from the special district. So within the Garment Center today, the zoning on avenues remains M16, which allows office and manufacturing uses as of right, but does not allow residential use. In area P1, the underlying zoning is M16. However, only manufacturing, retail, and wholesale showrooms are allowed as of right. Conversions of these spaces to office uses is only allowed if an equivalent manufacturing space is preserved in perpetuity. In Area P2, on the western blocks of the district, the underlying zoning is C6-4M. New commercial, residential, and hotels are permitted as of right, and existing buildings smaller than 70,000 square feet are able to convert to office, hotels, or residential. Buildings greater than 70,000 square feet are only able to convert to commercial or residential if an equivalent space is preserved for manufacturing uses in perpetuity, or with a CPC authorization that the building has been vacant for 3 years. Despite these zoning efforts to bolster the apparel industry in the garment center, apparel manufacturing has declined significantly over the past few decades. And this is a consistent trend nationally and in New York City, as the majority of production has moved overseas. Within the garment center, the number of people working in apparel manufacturing dropped from about 30,000 in 1987 to approximately 4,400 in 2016. However, the fashion industry, which also includes designers, clothing buyers, sellers, folks in logistics, is still a very substantial economic and employment sector in New York City. And much of this continues to occur in the garment center. In 2015, 43% of all tenants in the garment center bid were considered fashion-related businesses. And the bid is the area shown in green, which is slightly larger than, but includes most of the special district. So even though garment production has declined, it still remains an important part of the fashion ecosystem, providing a means of quickly turning around prototypes or samples or custom orders, as well as costumes for Broadway and the growing TV and film industry in New York City. There are also many accessory businesses like button and trim shops and sewing machine repair, and these are very important to the fashion industry as a whole. Many of the apparel manufacturing companies that remain are relatively small, with an average size of about 4,800 square feet per company and an average of about 10 employees per company. Despite the declines that we've seen in apparel manufacturing, we do not expect it to disappear. And as we'll talk about later, these manufacturing uses exist both within the preservation areas and outside of them. And it does not appear that zoning is the reason that they're still there. In terms of overall employment, the garment center has experienced tremendous growth in recent years. More than 23,000 jobs have been added between 2000 and 2016. This is a 56% increase. And in addition to the fashion industry, this includes significant growth in advertising, nonprofits, architecture, and software companies. So as manufacturing uses have declined, the area has largely changed to become a Class B and C office district, which also supports many restaurants and shops. In addition, due to the area's close proximity to Times Square and several major transit hubs, many hotels have been constructed in the past decade. There are currently more than 5,000 hotel rooms operating or under construction in the special district. This graph shows change in employment in all sectors in the garment center between 2000 and 2016, and then the red box shows the portion of that that is made up by garment production. The increasing demand for office space and the decreasing demand for manufacturing, paired with the difficulty enforcing the manufacturing preservation requirements, has meant that over time, much of the district has become non-conforming office. Within the preservation areas, approximately 5 million out of 8.5 million square feet are now non-conforming. There is still approximately 700,000 square feet of apparel manufacturing space within the preservation areas, which is not insignificant, but is not the dominant use in the district. Since the creation of the special district, only 180,000 square feet of space was permanently preserved for manufacturing to allow for office conversion, because of an awareness from landlords and owners that it would be difficult to find tenants as demand for apparel manufacturing declined. And a survey in 2017 found that of the 180,000 square feet that was preserved, approximately 2/3 do not actually have manufacturing uses in them today. Because many of these uses are non-conforming, property owners are often unable to make upgrades to their buildings because they can't get proper certificates of occupancy. This limits investment in the area and makes it very difficult for business owners to upgrade fire safety systems, elevators, HVAC systems, and other critical components of the buildings. Another problem that we've seen related to the proliferation of non-conforming office uses is that despite the area being designated as a state historic district, historic tax credits are typically not available without proper building permits, which further limits investment in these beautiful buildings in the area. The next few slides, I'll talk briefly about the land use and then go into the proposed zoning changes. Within P1, most of the buildings are approximately 10 to 12 stories with very high lot coverage. The majority are currently occupied by office uses, with a smaller portion of those as existing manufacturing uses. And there are currently about 16 underbuilt sites, most of these on very small lots. In P2, on the western edge, this is the area that was rezoned as part of Hudson Yards. And at that time, there were many garages and parking lots and underdeveloped sites. And the expectation at the time was that many of these would be developed as residential and office uses that would support the broader vision of Hudson Yards. However, the majority of these lots were developed as hotels. Currently, there are 14 hotels either in operation or under construction in this area of less than 4 blocks. There are also currently 3 large residential buildings in P2 and about 500 additional units in smaller tenement buildings. Along the avenues, most of the buildings are larger. These were originally used for showrooms and production space, and some of them have continued to be used for showrooms and production, but the majority are now Class B office related to fashion and the other industries we discussed earlier. Even though there are no preservation requirements, there are still several 100,000 square feet of production space on the avenues. The proposed text amendment would reinstate the underlying M16 zoning in the area that is currently P1, creating what would now be called A1. And this would include both the avenues and the mid-block portions between 8th Avenue and Broadway. This would eliminate the manufacturing preservation requirements and allow many existing property owners to receive proper certificates of occupancy and cure outstanding use violations. We are also proposing some modifications to create bulk envelopes that are more consistent with the existing neighborhood character. The existing bulk envelopes rely on the sky exposure plane or tower regulations, and these result in buildings that often don't maintain the street wall. There's currently also an option for a plaza bonus, which has resulted in some pretty unsightly buildings like the hotel in the photo on the right. And so within A1, we would be requiring a taller base height at the street line before the building sets back. And we would also propose eliminating the plaza bonus within 100 feet of wide streets to maintain the street wall along the avenues. The area that is currently P2, located on the side streets in the western portion of the district, would now be called A2. And the underlying C6-4M Hudson Yards regulations would continue to apply, which also includes street wall requirements from the Hudson Yards rezoning. However, in the A2 area, the existing regulations that restrict office and residential conversions of buildings greater than 70,000 square feet would be modified, so that these larger buildings could now be converted to office uses. Residential conversions of these larger existing buildings would continue to not be allowed. And across the entire district, we are proposing sign regulations consistent with C6-4 districts, which would reduce allowable heights and the size of signs, such as the billboard shown in the image on the left along 8th Avenue. Within A2, which also has more residential units, we're also proposing that flashing signs be restricted. And these changes are in response to requests from both the BID and both community boards in this district. And as I'll talk about on the next slide, the proposed text amendment would also create a City Planning Commission special permit for hotels within the entire district. The special permit is intended to ensure that remaining sites would be developed with a diverse mix of uses. It would allow the CPC to evaluate the appropriateness of hotel use in relation to the surrounding area, according to the following findings. In the M16 area, the Commission would need to find that the proposed hotel is consistent with facilitating a diverse business district. And in the C64M area, the Commission would need to find that the proposed hotel is consistent with a diverse mix of residential and commercial uses. Finally, in addition to changes to zoning that we're proposing in the Garment Center, there are also a range of efforts through non-zoning mechanisms to support garment production and the fashion industry in New York City and in the Garment Center. A steering committee was established last summer by Borough President Brewer to develop a series of recommendations to retain and promote a core of garment manufacturing in the Garment Center. And the city has developed a series of proposals and strategies based on these recommendations. These include creating a package of tax incentives to retain manufacturing tenants, committing funding for a nonprofit to acquire a building to be used by garment manufacturing, and other programmatic supports both to businesses and employees in the industry. So thank you very much for your time, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
I would guess that, as is the case with Dylan, you scratch the surface of almost any New Yorker and you find a link to the garment industry. It runs deep. I want to specifically call out and thank the Borough President Brewer, Councilmember Johnson, the community boards, the bids, the garment firms, the property owners, and of course our colleagues at EDC who have seen this proposal through some rough patches and to a point where now we have a sense that there is a broad consensus that this out-of-date zoning needs to be changed as part of a more holistic approach to the garment industry, both in Manhattan and in the city overall. And with that, I'll toss it open to questions from the Commission. Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Thank you for really a superb presentation. Visually appealing, informational, to the point. Nice work. And I think, you know, for the most part, we're referring this out, and I expect that we'll have a very lively conversation when it comes back for public hearing. But before we get there, are you able to tell us anything more about the city's capital commitment to acquisition of a building that I gather would, as you indicated, would be run by a not-for-profit? How far into the planning stage is that? Is there a timetable for moving forward?
Yeah, I think, so EDC has been taking the lead with developing those non-zoning mechanisms. And I certainly think they will be available when it comes back to the Commission to give you more information. My understanding is that the city has committed up to $20 million of city capital for the purchase of a building that would be run by a nonprofit. And I think that they're expecting, EDC is expecting to release an RFEI in the fall of 2018.
Okay, so not while this process is pending, unless something goes seriously awry with the...
I'm actually not entirely sure of how the timing of that program aligns with this decision.
Yeah. No, I have to say that this, it does strike me that essentially here we're giving up on the zoning protections that we thought in the 80s were going to lead to preservation of an economic sector. And I'm sure it doesn't escape many of my colleagues. The same thing could apply in other areas like Soho, where we have land use measures that are attempting to address sort of market forces that are beyond zoning to address. As the chair indicated, I know that a lot of work from a lot of different stakeholders has gone into bringing the proposal to this point. And, you know, I think it's important for us to be realistic about what's actually happening and what the right way is to encourage the garment jobs that remain to be successful. But it's a little bit depressing, I have to say, to have to acknowledge that what we thought we were being able to accomplish by zoning couldn't be enforced, didn't work, got ignored, and we just have to give up and move on.
Commissioner Deleuze.
I think it did work, right? I think it worked for decades, and I think the whole industry changed. And I think had we not had these zoning protections in place, I think the jobs that we do have here in the ecosystem that remains would have been long gone. So I think it's just about acknowledging where things are at today rather than saying something. I mean, I think enforcement probably could have been a lot better. But I do think it's important to say, absent these protections, I don't know that the industry would exist at all.
Yeah, it's just the extent of the non-conforming, the conversions that happened in the face of the rules on the books.
No enforcement. That's what happens when you don't have any enforcement. But what would help me, I think, coming back, and you started to outline it in your in these pages, like there is this ecosystem that does exist, and I'm assuming that the working group that came together tried to map out that ecosystem and all the different pieces of it to understand what does remain and what are the important critical components of it that exist. I mean, FIT is part of that component, for instance. They're not going anywhere anytime soon, I believe. So that would be helpful, I think, as part of our conversation when this comes back for me.
Okay.
Yes, Commissioner Dweck.
Thank you. Question, can you speak to the size of the recommended building or the proposed building that the EDC is putting an RFEI out for?
I don't know any details about the size. Yeah, I think that would be a better question for EDC to speak to the commission about. I can say that with the Industrial Development Agency program, which is the package of tax incentives, there are 300,000 square feet of space that have already that's already signed on to term sheets for that program. That's with 4 property owners, or 3 property owners, but 4 buildings, or at least portions of 4 buildings, totaling 300,000 square feet. And then there would be, in addition to that, the expectation of a building purchase that would be used for garment production. But I don't know, I don't have details about the size of that space.
If we can get some details or clarification, that would be helpful.
Sure.
The size of the space and some of the IDA benefits. Is it a pilot program? Is it a waiver of taxes? Is it a waiver of sales tax? What are the benefits that the IDA is offering?
Okay. We'll have EDC give you a full briefing on the package of tax incentives.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi. Along the same lines, I also had questions of the non-zoning, non-regulatory strategies and again, what resources would be committed for those? What does this programmatic business support look like? I'm quite familiar with other efforts to layer on, non-zoning strategies onto zoning efforts that fall apart after a few years, and the ability to know that those resources are committed and we have an organization with capacity to execute. I think those are all important questions.
In terms of the length of the IDA program, the program that's been put together would have a term of 15 years. So landlords would be required to either offer a 15-year lease, or if tenants didn't want to sign a 15-year lease, a shorter-term lease that would be renewable up, by the discretion of the tenant up to 15 years. Landlords would also be required to cap rents at $35 per square foot for garment producers in that space.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful, and I'm also asking about the programmatic business support, sort of what are the contours of that and what are the commitments, because that can go away very easily.
Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Dweck.
If there's some background on how they achieved the $35 per square foot, because that might be useful to us in our deliberations on other parts of the city that require manufacturing. So if there's some kind of support paper that says that that's the maximum a manufacturer can pay for space that's considered manufacturing, that might be helpful to us.
Sure.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Vice Chair Nuggles.
I had a question about the hotel special permit text amendment. And specifically, the special permit would require the CPC to consider whether proposed new expanded and/or converted hotel space could be better put to office, industrial, or in the C64 portion for residential use, consistent with a broad range of uses that exist in the district today. What might that criteria look like in terms of the evaluation we would?
Sure. I think the criteria would be based on the proportions of development in the surrounding area. So for example, in the C64M area, the intention was never for this area to be a tourist hub and for it to be solely hotels. And so I think in looking at a proposal, it would be evaluating the blocks around it, what the character is and what the mix of uses is. In terms of a specific criteria, I think that we are still developing that, and I don't think we have any more details about what would be evaluated by the CPC.
We have talked to our technical division as to what types of materials would be part of that application. I think when we comes back, we should have like a list of drawings and things like that for the commission.
I don't know, Jen, do you have anything to elaborate on that piece? Okay.
I would just note that we are looking to mimic what is in the hotel special permit, just recognizing that this is separate text. And then with respect to the C overlay, since residential use is already allowed there, making that an additional criteria. Other questions? Okay, then we will be referring this out to the community boards and to the borough president for 60 days. And when it comes back, we will then have a public hearing, which I think, as Commissioner Levin foresees, will be lively.
The second item on the agenda, page number 24, is a certification of an application for a special permit in Manhattan Community District 3. Our presenter is Xinyu Liang.
Good afternoon, commissioners. This is a private application. I'm waiting for the PowerPoint to load. All right. The applicant, 9 Orchard Partners LLC, seeks approval of a special permit pursuant to Zoning Resolution 74-711 to modify the height and setback regulations to allow approximately 2,000 square feet of the roof deck and the chairlift and stairs to encroach on the Sky Explorer plan in order to facilitate a transient hotel located at 9 Orchard Street and 60 Canal Street in a C62G zoning districts in the Lower East Side of Manhattan Community District 3. The proposed development site is comprised of 2 tax lots, which were developed as separate zoning lots, but will be merged into 1 zoning lot. Looking west along Canal Street, 9 Orchard Street is improved with a 12-story building constructed in 1912, and it was designated as an individual landmark in 2009. The building originally has a dome spire that was removed in the 1990s. DOB and LPC have approved the reconstructions and access to the new dome spire. As shown, you can see the structures there. Also, LPC has approved certificate of appropriateness relating to the restoration, reconstruction, and preservation of the landmark building, and issued a report relating to the modification of use and bulk. Looking east along Canal Street, 60 Canal Street, which is Lot 7, is improved with a 6-story office building, which was constructed in 2017. The applicant proposed to change the use from office to hotel, which is permitted as a right in this zoning districts. DOB and LPC have approved its integration with the landmark building for use as a hotel on a combined zoning lot. The development site is on the block bounded by Canal Street to the north, Orchard Street to the east, Division Street to the south, and Allen Street to the west. The surrounding area is characterized by mixed-use building with commercial use on the ground floor and residential, commercial, and light manufacturing use on the upper floors. The building in the surrounding area are predominantly loft and tenement style developments, generally built in the early 1900s. With average heights of 3 to 6 stories. Several mixed-use buildings on Allen Street and East Broadway raises to heights of 10 to 14 stories, including a 12-story hotel across development site on Allen Street. The surrounding area is well served by public transportation. The East Broadway station serving the F line is about 3 blocks away from the development site. The development site shares the block with 2 office buildings. 2 Allen Street was built in 2011 and is improved with a 7-story office building with ground floor retail. The second building, 4 Allen Street, is a 6-story office building built in 2002. The development site is comprised of Lot 7 and 8 within the 662G district, a commercial loft district outside of the central business district that has a maximum FAR of 6 for commercial and has no height limits. For height factor buildings, they cannot penetrate the sky exposure plan, which begins at 85 feet. The development site has a lot area about 6,432 square feet, which contains 2 commercial buildings with a combined about 64,000 square feet of zoning floor area. The zoning lot is overbuilt by about 26,000 square feet. There will be no increase in the floor area under this application. The landmark building is 169 feet, and the office building is about 77 feet. A portion of the landmark building from floors 8 through 12, as well as the spine dome, as shown in the yellow color here, obstructs the required sky exposure plan above a height of 85 feet. The new penthouse will comply with all height and setback regulations, and the applicant proposed to convert the existing landmark building and office building to a transient hotel. As you can see in the section here, both buildings will be connected internally at each floor. Zooming in, the applicant proposed to raise the roof deck 4 feet 4 inches above the permitted obstruction height of 3 feet 6 inches for a total height of 7 feet 10 inches above the existing roof in order to accommodate the mechanical systems and bring the roof deck level up to the same elevation as the 13th floor of the new penthouse restaurant. Above the roof deck, a chair lift for ADA access and stairs are proposed to extend an additional 5 feet 9 inches in order to lift up to the level of the restored dome spire for a total of 13 feet 7 inches above the existing roof. The dome spire and elevated roof deck will be used as an accessory amenity space for guests of the penthouse restaurant. In total, the area of the proposed roof deck that requires waivers, including the chair lift and stairs to the dome spire, is 2,135 square feet. The existing height of parapet, which you can see in dark blue color here, will remain unchanged, and the entire proposed elevated roof deck will remain below the top of the parapet wall and will not be visible from the street. In order to facilitate the proposed project, a special permit pursuant to 74-711 is required to modify the height and setback regulations. The approval of the requested actions will facilitate the increase in the permitted height of the roof deck serving the penthouse, marked in orange color here, as well as the chair lift and stairs accessing the restored dome spire, marked in purple color, to encroach on the sky exposure plan. This action is sought to provide an accessible path of travel from the proposed penthouse restaurant to the perimeter of the roof and the dome spires, as well as to accommodate the mechanical systems under the roof deck. The 74-711 special permits allows the commissioners to modify the bulk regulations for zoning lots containing a landmark designated by LPC, provided certain conditions and findings are met. Thank you.
Questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
If the dome does not exist or didn't exist before they started, the old dome got removed in the 90s and there was nothing there.
Yes,
But this special permit
Does not include
address
that.
the addition of the dome.
because LPC had already issued a permit to reconstruct the dome. It's considered as like a restore of the portions of the building that was
But
there.
it's still outside the sky exposure plane.
Yes.
Are there still any,
It's considered a restorations of the part of the building.
because it existed once before, it can be put back without a do-over?
My understanding is that DOB has issued the permits for that and has, I mean, they've started to build it, so yes.
Okay. It's a, I mean, I think it's great to restore it. My line of questioning shouldn't imply that I don't think it should be there. I'm just wondering if we should also be signing off on the, putting space there that doesn't exist now.
We have
as per the special
suggested
permit.
to the applicants to include the dome, but since they already received the permit from DOB, I think it's the applicant's choice to not include the dome as part of the special permit.
But it is occupiable space. It counts as, no? It's accessory space?
It's accessible. It will be accessible.
Anyway, enough for now.
If I get the gist of your question, we can follow up as to why we believe that CPC action isn't needed
It's not
for this.
required for the dome.
Okay.
But no doubt the dome should get rebuilt. Don't take the wrong implication from my question.
I'll provide additional information now.
Other questions? Okay, the application is certified.
Thank you.
Item number 3, page 61, is a certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendments in Brooklyn Community District 9. Kevin Kraft from the Brooklyn office is here to present.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a private application by Cornell Realty Management for a zoning map amendment to rezone the project area to R8X with a C24 commercial overlay, as well as a zoning text amendment to establish a mandatory inclusionary housing area to facilitate the development of 518 units of housing, including 140 affordable units and 15,000 square feet of retail at 2 non-continuous development sites located at 40 Crown Street and 931 Carroll Street. The applicants previously submitted an application for a rezoning and mapping of an MIH area that was certified by the Department of City Planning on January 30th, 2017, and was subsequently withdrawn by the applicants on April 19th, 2017. The project is located in central Brooklyn on the western edge of Crown Heights, Community District 9, just east of Prospect Park. The project area is generally bounded by Franklin Avenue to the east, Montgomery Street to the south, a line 300 feet west of and parallel to Franklin Avenue, and the center line between Carroll and President Street to the north. The Franklin Avenue shuttle train runs along the western boundary of the rezoning area, which you can see right here. The project area is 2.5 blocks long and 300 feet wide and includes 2 applicant-owned development sites. The project area was rezoned from R6 and R8 districts to contextual R6A and R8A districts as part of the Department of City Planning 13-block Washington Avenue rezoning, which was approved in 1991 by the Commission. The typical built form in the surrounding area consists of 2-story attached row houses, 4 to 6-story multifamily residential buildings, and 2 to 4-story mixed-use buildings with ground floor retail. There are also several major public facilities and institutions located in the surrounding area, including Medgar Evers College to the east, the Bedford Union Armory to the northeast, the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, as well as the Brooklyn Museum. There are high-rise developments nearby as well, including Tivoli Towers, a 33-story residential tower which is located in the project area, and Ebbets Field Houses, a complex of 7 25-story buildings 1 block east of the project area. The project area is also well served by transit and is located within the transit zone with access to the 2, 3, 4, and 5 trains at the Franklin Avenue station and the Botanic Garden station on the Franklin Avenue shuttle train, both located 2 blocks north on Eastern Parkway. The B48 bus line also runs southbound along Franklin Avenue and northbound along Washington and Classen Avenues. The project area outlined in the dashed yellow line consists of block 1188, the northern half block, block 1189, the middle block front, and block 1190, the southern block front. The northern portion is currently zoned R6A with a C13 commercial overlay and includes residential and commercial uses such as a discount store and a pharmacy. The middle block front between Crown and Carroll Streets is currently zoned R8A and includes the high-rise Tivoli Towers development and the New York Police Department Transit District 32 building. And the southern portion is zoned R6A and is currently vacant. The applicant-controlled proposed development sites, which are shaded in red, include 931 Carroll Street, which is an approximately 18,000 square foot interior lot located on Carroll Street directly west of Franklin Avenue, and 40 Crown Street, which is an approximately 56,000 square foot irregularly shaped lot that encompasses the entire block front of Franklin Avenue between Crown and Montgomery Streets. The site envelopes 2 vacant parcels, which are owned by Asian Americans for Equality. These can be shown here. These sites carry deed restrictions limiting development to buildings with 1 to 4 units of affordable housing. 931 Carroll Street, which was improved with a vacant single-story building that was formerly used for storage of motor vehicles and has recently been demolished. As you can see in these photos, Carroll Street abuts the Franklin Avenue shuttle here and dead ends at that street. 40 Crown Street is currently vacant and previously contained a single-story building which was used as an industrial laundry, which you can see in the bottom right-hand photo. However, the site now is completely vacant. The applicant is proposing 2 developments, one at 931 Carroll Street and the other at 40 Crown Street. Together, the 2 developments are proposed to include approximately 518 units of housing, including 140 permanent affordable units, 15,000 square feet of retail, and 151 parking spaces, built to an FAR of 7.2. 931 Carroll Street on the northern portion of the project area is proposed to include a 16-story residential building containing approximately 128 dwelling units, 35 of which would be affordable, and 37 off-street accessory parking spaces. 40 Crown Street to the south of the project area is proposed to be a 16-story mixed residential and commercial building with approximately 390 housing units, 105 of which would be affordable, and 15,000 square feet of ground floor retail, which would be fronting on Franklin Avenue, and 114 off-street parking spaces, which would be provided in the cellar. The applicant intends to utilize MIH option 1, which requires that 25% of the residential floor area within the development be affordable to households at an average of 60% AMI, with at least 10% at or below 40% AMI. This is a view looking towards the west. You can see the Ebbets Field houses here in the foreground, as well as Medgar Evers College and Tivoli Towers set in between the 2 development sites. This is a view looking east, again with Tivoli Towers in between the 2 development sites, Medgar Evers College in the background, and Ebbets Field peeking out over here. The actions necessary to facilitate the project include a zoning map amendment to rezone the project area from R6A with a C13 overlay, and R8A to R8X and R8X with a C24 commercial overlay. R8X is a contextual residential district that allows residential and community facilities at an FAR of 6.02 and a maximum building height of 150 feet, or 15 stories. When mapped with a mandatory inclusionary housing area, the maximum FAR is 7.2, and the maximum building height is 170 feet, or 175 feet with a qualifying ground floor. The project is in the transit zone, and accessory parking is required for 40% of all dwelling units above 80% of the area median income. The second action includes a zoning text amendment to designate a new mandatory inclusionary housing area on the northern half block and the southern block front of the project area. The applicant, again, is proposing MIH option 1. Thank you.
Questions? Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
Can you provide a little bit of highlights about the conversation with the community that has led to this application at this time? That would be helpful, given what happened last time. I have a question about whether or not any of the sites are brownfield sites.
Okay.
And then the other question I have is whether or not the developer is in conversations with AFI to try to acquire their parcels.
I do know originally they were part of the application, and I'll allow the applicants to address what happened with that relationship early on when it was first certified. As far as the brownfield sites, we can get that information for you and follow back up.
Okay. Okay, and any background about how the conversation's been going with Community Board 9 would be helpful considering.
Yeah, they are scheduled to present to the community board, I believe, tomorrow evening. As far as outreach, since they withdrew, their letter stated to us, they withdrew to do extensive community outreach, and I'll allow the applicants to address that at the public hearing.
Commissioner Cirillo.
Just a quick question, and perhaps it's just how I'm trying to figure out from the aerial to the zoning map. Is there any issue with the split, and I'm assuming it's one lot, that the potential for creating a split lot, does that have any implication we should be thinking about in advance? I'm not sure I'm laying the actual aerial over the map, but between Carroll and Crown,
yeah, this portion right here where you see
R8A, and we're splitting the lot. Is that, I mean, I know sometimes
there aren't concerns regarding that, and it would just be the southern portion. It wouldn't be capturing the northern.
Okay, so, and there's no implication to how that's working?
No, it's not
in terms
expected
of
to
what
be
may be
developed.
on. Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
This right here.
Other questions?
Right now, everything is.
Okay, then the application is certified. Thank you.
Right now, everything is already, and we're doing this.
Item number 4, page 87, is a certification of a zoning map and city map amendments in Queens Community District 1. Philip Montgomery is here to present.
Good afternoon. Today for certification, I have two separate but related applications by the Department of Parks and Recreation seeking amendments to the city, seeking amendments to both the city map and the zoning map. The actions will facilitate the disposition of city-owned property to the adjacent St. Michael's Cemetery in the Astoria neighborhood of Queens Community District 1. The project area is located in an R4 zoning district, approximately 1/2 mile southwest of LaGuardia Airport. The project site is bounded to the north by the by the Grand Central Parkway and Astoria Boulevard, to the east by the BQE, and to the west by St. Michael's Cemetery, and to the south by 30th Avenue. The area within 600 feet of the project site consists of predominantly commercial, multifamily residential, open space, and recreation uses. The project area has multiple developed parks, including St. Michael's Playground, located here, which is a 5.76 acre park with baseball fields, handball courts, fitness equipment, and playgrounds. And LaGuardia Landing Lights is also a 6.37 acre park east of the project site. So we're in this area. The nearest subway stop is the NW line Astoria Boulevard stop, approximately 1/2 mile west of the project site. And the project site is served by the Q19 bus that makes stops along Astoria Boulevard. The proposed city map amendment seeks the elimination and related disposition of St. Michael's Park to the adjacent St. Michael's Cemetery. St. Michael's Park, outlined in green here, was acquired by the city in 1941 and assigned to DPR for park purposes. The park is a 3.2 acre irregularly shaped parcel. The park has not been improved with park amenities and is currently landscaped with grass, trees, and functions primarily as a green buffer separating the the BQE on the east from St. Michael's Cemetery on the west. St. Michael's Cemetery is one of the oldest cemeteries in the New York metropolitan area. The original cemetery was purchased in 1852 and occupied approximately 7 acres of land. Since that time, the cemetery has grown and expanded to its present size of approximately 88 acres. The 3.2 acre expansion would allow the cemetery to expand cemetery operations. This is a picture looking at the north part of the project site from Astoria Boulevard. The same here. This picture here is from looking west from the BQE. And these are additional pictures from the BQE here and here, and this is from 30th Avenue. In 2015, the New York State Senate and Assembly authorized the alienation of St. Michael's Park and its conveyance to St. Michael's Cemetery. The legislation requires that the city shall use the proceeds of such sale for the acquisition of additional parkland and/or for capital improvements to existing park and recreational facilities within the borough of Queens. The remaining action is a minor zoning map amendment. The amendment establishes the adjacent R4 zoning district within the park being eliminated by removing the park boundaries from the zoning map. That's all.
Questions? Yes, Vice Chair Knuckles.
Philip, I just wanted to clarify, you cited the proceeds of a sale would be used for acquisition of replacement parkland or maintenance of existing park facilities?
That is correct.
So it's an alternative? I thought it was mandatory that you had to replace acquired parkland or the elimination of parkland with a like acreage.
It's like acreage or value. I think that this was the fair share analysis. This was not really considered a facility because it was not like open and in use as park. So they have the ability to use proceeds for other facilities.
So it's not a park?
Correct. Yeah, it's just overgrown trees. It's never been developed as a park. Yeah.
It looks like the edge of the highway.
No, I understood that, but I thought, anything designated a park is a park for purposes of disposition and.
I can let the applicant address that later, but that's how this was presented. So.
Yeah, we'll ask Parks to provide clarity when this returns.
Right.
Yes, Commissioner Capelli.
How much proceeds?
The number has not been discussed at this time.
Commissioner Ortiz.
And do they need to be used within a certain area? They go to general operating funds, or they go back to parks, or do they need to be used locally?
They go back to parks, and in this case, parks wanted the flexibility of using throughout the borough. I think a lot of times the proceeds are used within the community district where the park was.
Is there a reason why they would make that determination here?
I think because of the number of parks that are in the area, so they could have, I'll let them address that at the public area.
Okay, I think residents might have a different opinion on that one. And if St. Michael's Cemetery will be expanding, I mean, such a narrow little slip of land, how does that expansion happen, and what is the condition after their expansion? Do they plan to put a wall there, or?
They plan to, I believe, construct a small service road, but it will be used for additional burial plots.
So that strip will accommodate a small service road?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
But I would like to know what it will look like.
Okay.
For someone who's driving along, because right now they are seeing trees, so what's the alternative? Thank you.
Commissioner Deleuze.
To kind of follow up on Commissioner Ortiz's question, I guess as someone who drives through here sometimes, are there other rules that govern how close a burial spot is to a road? It would be helpful to know.
Okay.
And then is there something to kind of visually distinguish the spaces?
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, another application certified.
Thank you.
Item 5 on the agenda, page number 94, is a certification of an acquisition, UDAP designation, project approval, and disposition of city-owned property in the Bronx Community District 1. Manny Lagares is here to present.
Okay, good afternoon, Commissioners. The project, 599 Cortlandt Avenue, is a project, the applicant is HPD. And they're proposing to acquire privately owned property, as well as UDAP designation, project approval, and disposition of city-owned property In 2005, the project area was conveyed to a private developer to facilitate the construction of a 2 to 4 story small building with ground floor commercial. And it was approved in 2004 by the City Council and on September 8, 2004 by the mayor. The accelerated UDAP law allowed for the construction of this building because it was less than 5 units. So for 2 to 4 is fine. Therefore, the ULURP process, it exempts it from the ULURP process. Now, when it came to constructing the building, the construction crew noticed that the adjacent building was unstable. And the buildings department ultimately declared it unsafe, and it was demolished. At the time, the applicant decided not to build, and he's coming in today to build a development with 8 units of affordable housing. And by doing that, he's going over the threshold of the 4 units. So now he has to come in to city planning to obtain the permissions to do the construction. The project is located in the Merrill section of Bronx Community District Number 1 in the South Bronx. The slide at the center, you have the project area, and it's on a block that's bounded by East 151st Street to the north, on the east by Cortlandt Avenue, south by 150th Street, and on the west by Morris Avenue. The block basically has residential ranging in height from 1 to 5 stories. To the northwest of the site, you have a community facility use there. You have a school, huge campus there. And to the southwest is the hub, largest commercial area in the South Bronx. And the site is currently zoned R6, C24. And the photographs actually show you the top one, the site, which is sandwiched between the building on the right, which is residential with ground floor commercial. To the left, it's adjacent to a 5,000 square foot vacant lot, which is owned by the New York Psychotherapy, which also owns that huge structure to the left on the top. In the bottom photograph, you can actually see the psychotherapy building. You're looking west at the site. No, you're looking north at the site. And this is the top photo, a direct photo of the lot, which is approximately 3,000 square feet, is currently vacant and fenced. What you see in the back is just the other half of the block. That's the structure there. The bottom photograph shows you, once again, from the project site, you can actually see across the street where you have 5-story residential development. Now, the elevation to the right shows you the footprint of the proposed building, which will be a 4-story building. It'll go 3 stories and then set back 15 feet to provide a terrace for the top unit. You can also see the entrance on the first floor. On the right will be the commercial entrance. On the left, the residential entrance is approximately 42 feet in height. We're talking about the residential 5,600 square feet of residential, and the commercial approximately 753 square feet. Again, it's 8 affordable units at 60% of AMI. The average household actual household income for community board number 1 is approximately $19,000. And this is the site plan of the building. You have existing trees at the front, and you see the building as it sets back. You have a backyard approximately 40 feet with plantings, benches, etc. Are there any questions?
Commissioner Delauze.
Just a quick question, Manny.
Yeah, sure.
Of the 8 units, what's the unit mix in terms of studios, 1s and 2s?
I don't have it in front of me right now, but I do have that information. There are studios and one-bedroom apartments, but I'll have that information for you.
It'd also be helpful when it comes back, considering the AMI level in the community board and the fact that at 60% of AMI, these units won't be affordable to the local community board. It would be helpful to hear from HPD if they have any Section 8s that they plan to set aside for the project.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
On the prior history on this site, the briefing sheet says that they ran into difficulty due to the structural instability of the adjacent abandoned church. DOB declared the building unsafe and it was demolished. Is it the church that was demolished, or is it
Yes,
what they had started to build?
It's the church building itself, yes. It was the church.
And is that now what was shown as the vacant parcel that's owned by the psychotherapy?
Right, owned by, exactly, yes.
Okay, and do we know what development plans?
No, we don't. I even checked the DOB website to see if there's any current activity or plan. Nothing there.
Okay. So does anything remain of the work that they began doing?
Well, this is exploratory, more or less the excavation, exploratory. Then they stopped when they noticed that the adjacent building was
So they didn't get into the point of putting down foundations?
Exactly, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
No, that was my question. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, the application is certified.
Good. Thank you.
Item number 6, page number 122, is a pre-hearing review for an acquisition to facilitate the continued use of a child care center and senior center in Bronx Community District 5. Manny is here to present.
Okay, the Lutheran Social Services of New York Early Life Center 1 and Bronx Works Innovative Senior Center. I believe the commissioner is familiar with this. It was certified back in January 2nd of this year and recertified on March 12th. The applicants are the Administration for Children's Services, Department of Citywide Administrative Services, and Department for the Aging. The location of the facility is at 80 East 181st Street within the West Concord section of Bronx Community District number 5. They're requesting an acquisition of the property for continued use of a child care center. Both facilities, which is a child care center and senior center, have been at this location since the 1970s. And the last approved application by the commission for this facility was back in 1994. This is the locator map of the Bronx, West Concord section of Bronx Community District number 5. And the site is located in the center, outlined in red. It's a 3-story building, approximately 47,000 square feet of floor area. It's adjacent to the south to a school, across the street from a park, counter corner to another school. And then on the north and on the east, you have a residential development. This is an R8 zoning district. And you have housing, residential from 2 to 8 stories. This is the facility in context with the other buildings. To the east, you have the Grand Concourse, where you have a stop for the B&D at 182nd Street. And you also have on the west, you have the number 4 subway line. And there are buses that run along East 181st, as well as Burnside and Grand Concourse. The child care and the senior centers, they both have a common entrance, as you can see here. The entrance to the elderly, the senior center is on the right, and for the child care center is to the left. Basically, the center is open from Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Parents drop the children off, they pick them up later on. ACS provides a snack, educational programs, and they also have recreation. This is one of the rooftop play areas, which from when you saw it last time, they have provided some improvements. You have the cushion on the metal structures, as you can see as you look at the fence. Okay, let me see. This is the senior center, which is a part of the application. Approximately 200 seniors. They're open from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., Monday through Friday. Also on the first Saturday of each month. This is also on the first floor, the exercise room. They also have a kitchen area, servicing pantry, and basically the seniors come here for recreation, socialization, the good food that is served, and this is the computer section that they utilize to use the internet and also to file for the IRS. They also get training on the computers. And the Community Board 5 voted in favor of this application, 17-0-0, and I haven't received the Borough President's recommendation. Are there any questions?
Questions on the application? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Yes, Manny, I have two questions. Is there a proposed term for this renewal? And is there a scope of work?
Yes, there is
find it in my heap of papers from before.
Yes, there is the term is 20 years.
20 years.
Up to 20 years, but it's actually what they've written to us in the application is 10 plus 2 options to renew, maximum 20. And yes, there is a scope of work.
And are you able to tell us roughly what they're having to do? Is it an extensive scope of work?
Well, there are items that need to be done. The critical items from the presentation I made to the commission the last time were the rooftop play areas. The fact that the metal structures were not cushioned and were not padded, and now they are. And the roof is in the scope of work for repair.
Thank you. But not sprinklers, as has been a hot topic around here. I noticed that we got sprinklers over the pool table, so I guess that's where the fire's got to be.
Yes, yes. I
Okay.
Vice Chair Knuckles?
No, I think Commissioner Levin addressed my questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Other questions? And we can then ask about sprinklering at the public hearing on Wednesday.
Okay. Thank you.
Item 7, page number 143, is a post-referral review for a modification to a previously approved restrictive deck in Queens Community District 3. Kathy Coe is here to present.
Good afternoon, Commission. So this application was referred out on April 9th, 2018. Okay. As a reminder, the applicant is LaGuardia Hotel, LLC. The action requested is to cancel restrictive declaration D120, which was approved in 1972. Canceling this declaration would bring existing uses on the property into conformance, and in particular, a public parking facility on the property. The project area is located at 9010 Ditmars Boulevard, which is in the East Elmhurst neighborhood of Community District 3. And the City Planning Commission approved a zoning map change on this property in 1972, establishing the C22 commercial overlay to allow for the expansion of the existing 6-story hotel. And the Board of Estimate also imposed restrictive declaration D120, which restricts development on the project area to only expansion of the hotel, with accessory parking spaces, along with guidelines on landscaping, lighting, and surveillance. So again, the project area is in East Elmhurst, just south of LaGuardia Airport, separated by the Grand Central Parkway. And the project area consists of block 1068, outlined here in red, and contains lots 1 and 48. And both lots are under common ownership in a single zoning lot in an existing R32C22 district. The slide just further shows existing uses on the project area, one being a 6-story hotel structure and an accessory surface parking lot, as well as an approximately 600-space surface parking lot arranged in 2 separate lots with airport shuttle bus service and a 600-square-foot accessory office to the public parking facility. Should the declaration be canceled, the project area would consist of the existing hotel, accessory parking spaces, and public parking uses. The public parking spaces outlined in red here on lot 48 would be reorganized with 4 public parking lots with 150 parking spaces each. The applicant proposes to build 4 accessory office buildings on each lot, each 150 square feet. These accessory office buildings are permitted under current zoning and would be used for valets to seek shelter during cold and hot seasons. Landscaping and buffer requirements would be fulfilled under current zoning and would be enforced by DOB. And a new 20-foot curb cut would be located on 90th Street, and the existing curb cuts on 90th Street and 23rd Avenue would be removed. This image just zooms in more into the proposed parking renovation. Highlighted in green are street tree, landscaping, and buffer requirements that would be fulfilled under current zoning and would be enforced by DOB. There would be a 10-foot wide landscape strip to be at least 4 feet high, located between the public parking lot and the adjacent residential lots to the east. A 7-foot wide landscape strip would be separating the public parking facility from the sidewalks along 23rd Avenue and 90th Street in accordance to existing zoning. And new street trees would be provided around the entire site. Regarding required landscaping under the existing declaration, the plan attached to the 1972 declaration is fairly illegible, so it is difficult to determine what exactly was required. It seems to show street trees around the frontage of the expanded hotel on 23rd Street and about half of 90th Street, with a separation that the declaration refers to as a retaining wall. Because the restrictive declaration does not allow for public parking, there are no guidelines for these current conditions. Landscaping requirements under existing zoning would be an improvement compared to what's existing now, in particular for the adjacent residences who would benefit from increased landscaping separating the homes from the public parking lots. Currently, there is only a fence. And as required by the declaration, there are closed-circuit cameras throughout the property, and these are to remain to provide surveillance. Lighting is also designed so as to not shine on residential areas, and this design is to continue. The parking lots are to contain stackers, which rise to a height of 4 to 14 feet, and the attendants will make efforts to park cars away from the residences. Because these spaces are primarily used for long-term parking, the turnover rate is slower, and headlights are not expected to raise any issues. Curb access for the public parking lots would be located on 90th Street with a new 20-foot curb cut with ingress and egress access to the parking facility with internal east-west access to all 4 parking lots and an airport shuttle bus turnaround at the eastern end, which currently exists, has a schedule, and that will also maintain. This project was presented at a full board meeting on May 17th, 2018 to Community Board 3. The board approved the project, 26 in favor, 1 against, 0 abstaining, with the following conditions. One is that the existing hotel would not be used as a homeless shelter. Another is for the applicant to come to see the CB3 Land Use Committee if anything other than a hotel is ever to be developed, and that constituents of Community Board 3 would be given priority for any hiring opportunities on the site. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Questions? Commissioner Capelli.
Yeah, the area that buffers the houses, the 2-story residential dwellings above the parking area next to the Marriott Hotel, is there buffering in there as well, or is that open?
Sorry, do you mean above this access drive here, just north of
Right,
the lot?
as you travel up towards the hotel, away from the proposed parking areas?
There is currently only a fence.
Only a fence. Has there been any discussion about increasing buffering up there as well, so that the 2-story houses are given relief from the traffic from the hotel?
Thus far, the applicant has committed to just providing the zoning buffering requirements as required under the current zoning, which really is only between these 2 lots, lots 1 and 48. Are you talking about that area where we see street trees?
I'm talking about the area that is adjacent to the hotel that continues up, where the houses back up on the hotel.
I see.
Yes.
I believe there are some tree cover right now, but there hasn't been any further discussion about increasing what's currently there.
Maybe they should think about that.
Okay.
Do something nice for the neighborhood.
Sure.
Yes, Commissioner Levin.
The community board's desire that this not be used as a homeless shelter, is that out of a particular situation with this hotel, or is that generalized concern by this community board of broader city policy?
It's a little bit of both. There is a general concern with this community board. Also, more recently, the applicant has informed DCP that the lender has begun a foreclosure process on this property, part of which is the applicant intends to refinance the hotel. Part of that hurdle is that there is a restrictive declaration on the site with uses that are not in conformance. But, should this declaration be lifted, the applicant has every intention to refinance the hotel. So that then did open up a conversation at the community board meeting about, if they couldn't refinance, what else could possibly be there. But other than that, the applicant had said, they are intending to continue the existing use. But if not, that this could potentially be a dormitory for the Vaughn School of Aeronautics, which is just adjacent to the site.
So are they still under license with, it's a Marriott Courtyard, I believe. Is that still in place, or is that in jeopardy also with the foreclosure?
I believe the operator might be in question as well, depending on the refinancing of.
Okay, well, we'll find out more on Wednesday,
I
hope.
Oh,
Actually, there's.
This one does not go.
This is not it?
No,
Oh,
no.
This is it? This is it?
This is it. I'll note that it's interesting that we see here a bank financing requirement as an enforcer of zoning requirements. Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
First, thanks for that background about the discussion at the community boards, Kathy. I'm just wondering, do you know if any of the adjacent property owners were in touch with the community board about this particular application and any disturbance that they're experiencing with the parking?
No, there really hasn't been any issues raised by the adjacent residents to this public parking lot. Though members of the community board did acknowledge the owner of the property as a good neighbor and has been a good neighbor for many decades.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, as this does not require a public hearing, I would ask for an assent by a show of hands to this modification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Item 8, page number 163, is a pre-hearing review for a UDAP designation and disposition of city-owned property in Manhattan Community District 10. Joseph Hennekins of the Manhattan office is here to present.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is an application by the Department of Housing Preservation and Development for UDAP designation, project approval, and disposition of city-owned property to facilitate a 7-story mixed-use building in Central Harlem Community District 10. It was certified on February 12th and is returning today for pre-hearing review. I'll go through an abbreviated presentation today, and the full applicant team will present on Wednesday with more details. The property is located on West 126th Street, near the intersection with Frederick Douglass Boulevard. It's zoned currently R72C24, and it's across the street from the special 125th Street district. The site's comprised of 3 different tax lots, and there's a long history of prior actions at the site, including a 2007 zoning map change, which extended a C24 overlay over the property. However, the properties have never been successfully conveyed to new owners, and HPD has retained ownership. As you can see in the surrounding area map, the property is located at sort of a threshold between a commercial area to the south and a predominantly residential area to the north. It's bordered to the east by 2 3-story buildings, one of which has a plumbing business and one of which is a church. To the west is a 5-story walk-up residential building with ground floor retail and a 2-story funeral home. The majority of the block contains the CS 154 Harriet Tubman Learning Center, which has 2 co-located schools. The St. Nicholas Houses, which is a NYCHA development, is 1 block north. And as I mentioned, 125th Street is just 1 block south. The back entrance to the Apollo Theater is basically across the street from this development site. And one other thing to note is that the Victoria Theater is also nearby. This is currently under construction and will be a 25-story hotel and residential complex. So the property is vacant, but since 2015, it has been used as a wildflower garden known as the Nelson Mandela Community Garden. The garden operates under a temporary green thumb agreement with HPD, and that agreement mandates that HPD is required to provide an alternate site list to the garden if ownership is being transferred, which HPD has done in this case. So in 2015, HPD issued an RFP aimed at encouraging MWBE firms in the affordable housing development sector. And the winning proposal for this site was by Lamore Realty, which is a second-generation Harlem property owner and developer. And it's for a 7-story mixed-use building to be known as Bolton Commons. The building would have a height of 75 feet and 36,000 square feet total, and an FAR of 4.28. The ground floor of the building would have a residential lobby, a small retail space, and then it would have 2 spaces to be leased to a local nonprofit known as Silicon Harlem. The back space would be used as a tech incubator by that organization, and then the interior space would be used as a classroom for their App Youth Leadership Academy, which is an after-school program for high schoolers. Floors 2 to 7 would contain 37 units of housing. 36 of them would be affordable units, and 1 would be a unit for a superintendent. It would be a mix of studios 1s, 2s, and 3s. It would be 11 studios, 12 one-bedrooms, 11 two-bedrooms, and 3 three-bedrooms. The units will be offered at a range of income bands from 30% to 90% of AMI. And I should note that those income bands were revised downward as a result of community feedback to reach that 30% level. So on April 4th, Community Board 10 voted unanimously to recommend approval of the actions. The Manhattan Borough President recommended approval with conditions, the 2 conditions being that the city find an alternate site for the garden and that the city maintain an interest in the land after conveyance. And approval, again, of the UDAP and disposition actions would facilitate a 7-story mixed-use building. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Yes, I just wonder if the staff has any further information that would address the Borough President's concern. That is, what are the prospects for the gardeners finding an alternate site? I know that sometimes takes some pushing and pulling and agreement making. And also, since we've, on the question of retaining an interest in the land, we've seen from the city, to our great pleasure, recently, projects like this where the city puts it on a 99-year ground lease. Is that a possibility here?
Sure. To the garden question, and HPD can answer both of these probably with more detail, but to the garden question, HPD did provide a list of alternate sites. Some of those were existing gardens that would take on the gardeners, and others were vacant sites. The gardeners rejected the list at the time, and I think negotiations are still ongoing. With the interest, as I understand it, this sort of late in the process, it would add an additional step that might not be possible with the scope and the timeline. But I know that HPD has said that the term sheets, they've been expanding the length of the affordability requirements for the site. But I'm not sure about the ownership interest, but I'm sure HPD can
hear more
speak
about
that.
Hearing that'd be
for sure.
Thanks.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
No, I would just observe as someone who passes the site, well, heretofore has. I guess I won't be doing it so frequently in a few days. But I don't remember a vital garden activity on the site.
It's pretty beautiful right now.
Is it? Very recent.
It's been a while.
Well,
I have a question because I happen to know that at least this garden has been here for about 5 years. And it's been a bone of contention with HPD trying to let this RFP for a while. So you have identified that the city is looking to either house them within another community garden or looking for another site for them to plant and make a garden. Knowing that some of these sites are slated for development and not for preservation of parkland or community gardens, are they endeavoring to find them a plot that they don't have to move again? Because this is the perpetual move the garden, and the gardeners get upset, and then eventually the gardens go away because they don't have anywhere to go. So what is the intent of moving them to the next site, and what is the intent of that site? Do we know?
I'll have to have HPD speak to that. But just one other note of background, there was an agreement, HPD, I believe in 2014, where HPD set aside and transferred ownership of, I think, a number of garden sites to parks, and a few of the sites they retained ownership with interest of development, and this was one of those sites that they retained ownership.
Right. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, we'll learn more about the garden and the rest of the project at the public hearing on Wednesday. Thank you.
Item number 9, page 193, is a pre-hearing review for zoning map and zoning text amendments in Brooklyn Community District 4. Sarit Patkin is here to present.
Before you start, can the record reflect that I'm recused on the item? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Anthony Grandy is the project manager for 621 DeKalb Avenue, and I am filling in for him today. This is a private application by 1601 DeKalb Avenue owner LLC for zoning map and zoning text amendments to facilitate the development of 2 new 9-story residential buildings containing a total of 122 dwelling units in the Bushwick neighborhood, Community District 4, Brooklyn. The project area is located in Northwest Bushwick within Community District 4. The surrounding area is primarily residential with buildings ranging from 2-story single-family homes to larger multifamily apartment buildings up to 5 stories in height. Industrial uses are found mostly northwest of the project area, and commercial uses are found throughout the area, concentrated on Wyckoff Avenue. There are no active industrial uses in the project area. The project area is within M11 and R6 zoning districts. The R6 district covers most of the surrounding area, while the M11 district extends northwest. DCP has been working with the Bushwick Community Plan Steering Committee, City Council, and other city agencies since 2014 to develop a long-term vision for the future of Community District 4. The project area consists of a portion of 1 block with frontages on Hart Street, Wyckoff Avenue, and DeKalb Avenue. Wyckoff Avenue is a heavily traveled mixed-use corridor with 1 to 4-story commercial and mixed-use buildings, including supermarkets, laundromats, local retail, fresh food stores, and local restaurants. 1 block east of the project area is the 12-story Wyckoff Heights Medical Center. The area is well served by transit. The MTA L train subway line runs along Wyckoff Avenue with a station at DeKalb Avenue and a station entrance within the project area. The proposed development site, outlined in blue, is a 25,000 square foot through lot with frontage both on Hart Street and on DeKalb Avenue. The project area contains a mix of uses. Uses fronting on Wyckoff Avenue include a 2-story laundromat and boxing gym, a 1-story U.S. Post Office, and a 1-story restaurant. There are also 2 loft buildings, both of which have been converted to residential use, and one of which has legal status under the loft law. The development site contains all parking use. There are also 2-story residential buildings within the project area. The proposed development would be 2 9-story residential buildings, one fronting on DeKalb Avenue, the other fronting on Hart Street. Together, the proposed buildings would contain a total of 122 dwelling units with 102,000 zoning square feet, which would total 4.12 FAR for the zoning lot. Using MIH option 1, the proposed development would provide approximately 27 permanently affordable housing units at an average of 60% AMI. The applicant intends to utilize the 421A program, yielding 31 affordable units, slightly exceeding MIH requirements. The applicant requests 2 zoning actions. First, a zoning map amendment to change an M11 district to an R7A district with a C24 commercial overlay within 100 feet of Wyckoff Avenue. A small portion of the rezoning area will also change from an R6 district to an R6B district. Second, the applicant seeks a zoning text amendment to create a new mandatory inclusionary housing area coterminous with the proposed R7A district. The application was certified on February 12, 2018. On April 23rd, Community Board 4 submitted a recommendation of disapproval with no conditions or modifications, voting 1 in favor, 30 opposed, and 4 abstaining. The Community Board included in their recommendation the board's testimony to the borough president. The testimony highlighted several concerns of the Community Board, including not deep enough affordability, residential and business displacement, risk of blocking loft building windows, and loss of commercial parking. The applicants also provided a letter to the Community Board in response to their concerns. In the letter, the applicant states a preference to not include all lots from their site to Wyckoff Avenue in the rezoning area, which they explain as a requirement of the Department of City Planning. On May 30th, the Brooklyn Borough President submitted a recommendation of approval with conditions. The conditions are for the applicants to, most importantly, eliminate the portion of the rezoning area fronting Wyckoff Avenue, a transit corridor, include MIH option 3, provide more and deeper affordability beyond MIH, add a commercial overlay along Hart Street, accommodate the existing boxing club with affordable commercial space in the new development, commit to larger unit sizes, provide a legal mechanism to ensure the new development does not obstruct the adjacent loft windows, add resiliency and sustainability measures, and retain Brooklyn-based contractors. Given the recommendation of the community board and borough president, as well as the applicant's written response stating a preference not to include all lots from their site to Wyckoff Avenue in the rezoning area, the department sees inconsistency in the way the applicant presented their intentions and is concerned about the irrational land use pattern that could result. DCP worked in good faith with the applicants to create a rational zoning boundary, and potential exclusion of the additional sites would result in arbitrarily rezoning only an isolated, irregularly shaped mid-block site and prevent a consistent and orderly land use pattern. The department is very concerned by the applicant's lack of commitment to providing a land use rationale for the designated rezoning area. The application is scheduled for a public hearing on Wednesday, June 13th. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the commission. Vice Chair Knuckles.
Does the applicant have any concerns about a spot zoning, which I think one could argue if the larger project area was not included in this rezoning?
Well, the applicant will be here on Wednesday, so we can ask them that question directly. We do have 2 letters from them that were shared in your package. One letter to the community board, which I described in my testimony or in my presentation, where they did not express concern about that, and a subsequent letter from June 7th, where there was more awareness of that concern.
Commissioner Deleuze.
First, I feel for you filling in on this one. And so I'm going to ask a question you may not be able to answer, but I'll ask it anyway. And that is, if there's, considering the response by both the borough president and the community board, it would just be helpful to know what kind of community outreach the applicant did, prior to certification to get to this point, and in particular, discussions with the adjacent loft owners and the business owners. If they could just be prepared to speak to that on Wednesday.
Yeah, they can definitely be prepared to speak to that.
Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Well, this may also not be a fair question for a pinch hitter, but it's more than an implication. There's an assertion in the materials we received from the Bushwick Community Plan Steering Committee, and I think threaded in the community board's recommendation as well, that they were blindsided by this application, unaware that it was coming at them. And
so this application had been presented to the Community Board Land Use Committee previously, and I think there were members of the Bushwick Community Plan Steering Committee that were aware of the project. I don't know what the most recent update they received was, but there were presentations to them previously.
Of it? Okay. And is this proposed, maybe not the details of the rezoning, but the notion of developing this site to residential and having this scale of development, is that consistent with the framework that the community has been working on?
So rezoning Wyckoff Avenue to be a transit corridor and increasing density on Wyckoff is consistent with the Community Plan Steering Committee and their framework. As for manufacturing to residential rezoning on this site specifically, we've heard different things in our outreach. There was a presentation by the Economic Development Committee of the Steering Committee last year, which did support residential on this site at an R6A zoning district, so somewhat lower density. More recent proposals we've heard from the committee do not support residential on the site. So that's a change from what we previously heard.
Helpful background, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, this will go to public hearing on Wednesday.
Item number 10, page 258, is a pre-hearing review for zoning map, zoning text amendments, and special permits in Brooklyn Community District 2. Amin is here to present.
It's my turn to be recused.
Afternoon, Commissioners. 80 Flatbush is set for a public hearing on Wednesday. This is an application by the New York City Educational Construction Fund and Alloy Development seeking a zoning map amendment, zoning text amendments, and a special permit. Together, these applications would facilitate a new approximately 1.1 million square foot mixed-use development with 2 schools, Class A office space, residential units, cultural space, and ground floor retail at 80 Flatbush Avenue in downtown Brooklyn, Community District 2. The proposed project area is part of the vibrant mixed-use neighborhood of downtown Brooklyn, New York City's 3rd largest central business district, and is within the special downtown Brooklyn district, outlined here in blue. The proposed project area, seen in red, is located on a trapezoidal block bounded by Flatbush Avenue, State Street, 3rd Avenue, and Skimmerhorn Street. North of the project site is the Fulton Mall shopping corridor, the 5.5 million square foot Metrotech commercial and academic campus, and the 1.9 million square foot City Point mixed-use development. To the east is the Brooklyn Cultural District, which is anchored by the Brooklyn Academy of Music and is home to over 50 cultural organizations. Southeast of the project site is the Barclays Center Arena, and just across the street is the Atlantic Terminal Transit Hub, with access to 10 subway lines and the regional Long Island Railroad station. To the south and west lie portions of the residential neighborhood of Boerum Hill, and as indicated by the colored lines on this map, the area is well served by transit, with the 2, 3, 4, 5, N, Q, R, B, D, and G lines all stopping within 2 to 3 blocks, numerous bus lines running along Livingston Street, Fulton Street, and Atlantic Avenue, and the regional LIR located again at Atlantic Terminal. The immediate context around the proposed project area has seen a lot of change over the past decade and includes a mix of residential buildings, community facilities, and mixed-use developments. In particular, Flatbush Avenue continues developing as a high-density mixed-use corridor with many of the tallest high-rise buildings in the borough. East of the site is the historic Williamsburg Savings Bank, a luxury condo building, and BAM South, a new mixed-use development with a retail and community facility podium and a public plaza. North of Flatbush Avenue is the Mark Morris Dance Center and BAM North, another new mixed-use development with a retail and community facility podium. Directly north along Skimmerhorn Street is the Hub, a mixed-use development with a commercial retail podium. To the west, across 3rd Avenue, is the historic Baptist Temple, and south of that block includes a mixed-use building containing the YWCA offices. Immediately south of the site is State Street, a primarily residential street with some ground floor retail, and includes a mix of buildings that range from a condo apartment to row houses. The proposed project area is located within the special downtown Brooklyn district, which was created in 2001 and rezoned in 2004 as part of the Downtown Brooklyn Plan. The plan rezoned much of the neighborhood to high-density commercial districts, allowing for a range of uses that would foster a 24/7 mixed-use environment to serve downtown Brooklyn and the surrounding communities. As described earlier, to the northwest, north, and east, the surrounding uses and districts are consistent with their location within Brooklyn's central business district and generally include medium and high-density 6 to 12 FAR commercial, residential, hotel, and community facility uses within the C64, C62, and C61 districts. To the south and west, there are medium-density 2 to 4 FAR residential, commercial, and community facility uses within the R7A and R6B districts. The proposed development site is mapped entirely with the C62 district and has an R8 residential equivalent. The maximum height is regulated by a sky exposure plane that begins at a height of 85 feet and slopes inward over the zoning lot. The site is a full trapezoidal-shaped block consisting of 6 tax lots and contains 61,400 square feet of lot area. The proposed project area is coterminous with the proposed development site. You may recall that Lot 1, a 17,500 square foot lot on the western side of the block, is controlled by New York City's Department of Education and is improved with the existing Khalil Gibran International Academy, an Arabic language-focused public high school that consists of 5 interconnected buildings that were developed over the course of the past century. The remainder of the lots on the eastern side of the block are controlled by Alloy Development. Combined, they include 43,500 square feet of lot area and include a mix of residential and commercial uses. Currently, Khalil Gibran High School is not up to School Construction Authority standards. The school is not ADA accessible and has serious physical deficiencies. In response to these conditions and the general need for more school seats in the area, in 2016, ECF released a request for expressions of interest. ECF, as a public benefit corporation, provides funds for mixed-use developments that include school facilities. In 2017, they selected Alloy Development and moved forward with a proposal. The proposed development scheme by ECF and Alloy Development calls for a new 1.1 million square foot mixed-use development with 2 schools, Class A office space, residential apartments, ground floor retail, and cultural space. You may recall, as seen in this program diagram, the proposal includes 5 distinct buildings. In the middle of the site, in blue, is the school building. On the eastern side is a mixed-use tower with residential, office, and retail uses. On the western side is another mixed-use tower with residential and commercial use, and 2 preserved buildings, one that includes a cultural component in green, and the other that includes retail, seen in orange. Taking a closer look at the site from the north side along Flatbush Avenue and Skimmerhorn Street, the applicants have stated that they purposefully designed the proposal to relate to the surrounding area in use and form. On Skimmerhorn Street and 3rd is a preserved portion of Khalil Gibran High School that rises 3 stories and would be the new cultural facility across the street from the cultural district. Entrances to the offices and the 2 mixed-use towers would be within the 2 mixed-use towers would be along Flatbush Avenue and Skimmerhorn Street, and the new Khalil Gibran High School would front on Skimmerhorn. Active retail uses would align Flatbush Avenue to maintain the retail continuity along the thoroughfare. Similar to the north side, the applicants have stated that the southern portion responds to the more residential context of State Street by allocating complementary uses and maintaining lower base heights. As seen here, the mixed-use tower at Flatbush and State has a 3-story base before setting back and locates the entrance of the residential use along State Street. In the middle of the block is the elementary school, which includes an entry court to ease drop-off and pickup for students and an unobstructed rooftop recreation space. At the corner of State and 3rd is the second preserved portion of the Khalil Gibran High School, which rises to a height of approximately 50 feet and would include local retail and amenities open to the greater community. Particularly along State Street, the applicants emphasize the importance of the urban experience for the pedestrian by maintaining an approximate 50-foot base height for the full length of the block, preserving the existing low-rise building at State Street, and designing the frontage of the triangular building to mimic brownstone characteristics in materials and scale. Furthermore, in order to allow Khalil Gibran High School to remain in continuous operation through construction, the project will be phased. The first phase redevelops the eastern portion of the site and includes 2 buildings, Building A, which would house the 2 new schools, and Building B, which would be the triangle mixed-use tower. In total, the first phase would include the new 350-seat Khalil Gibran High School, a new 350-seat elementary school, 90,000 square feet of office space, approximately 275 apartments, and 27,000 square feet of retail. Upon the completion of the first phase, Khalil Gibran High School would be relocated to its new facility, allowing the second phase of redevelopment on the western side of the block. The second phase consists of 3 buildings. Building C would be a mixed-use tower, and buildings D and E would be the adaptive reuse buildings. In total, the second phase would include 110,000 square feet of office, approximately 650 apartments, including approximately 200 MIH apartments, 15,000 square feet of retail, and 10,000 square feet of cultural space. As a result of the proposal, the city would ultimately receive more land than it previously owned due to the large footprint that the schools would take up on the site. This diagram shows the size and location of the existing city-owned land versus the future land ownership. In order to facilitate the proposal, the applicants are proposing a zoning map amendment to rezone to a C69 district within the special district. Zoning text amendments to designate a new mandatory inclusionary housing area, establish the C69 within the special district, and create a new ECF special permit. and concurrently apply for the special permit to modify bulk use, parking, loading, and MIH requirements. The applicants are proposing to rezone an existing C62 district to a C69 district. The C69 district is a high-density commercial, residential, and community facility district that is intended to be mapped within the city's central business districts. The downtown Brooklyn C69 would permit up to 18 FAR for commercial and community facility uses and 12 FAR for residential use. The applicants are proposing to designate a mandatory inclusionary housing area in Appendix F with options 1 and 2, and are selecting option 1 requiring 25% affordable housing with an average AMI of 60%. However, this requirement will be modified by the special permit, which I'll explain shortly. Additionally, in order to establish the C69 district within the special district, the applicants are proposing to update the bulk regulations to include the C69 district within existing bulk and envelope regulations. Furthermore, in order to facilitate the proposed project, the applicants are creating a new ECF special permit, 74752, which is based on an existing ECF special permit. The proposed special permit would allow the CPC to modify use, bulk, parking, loading, and MIH requirements. Pursuant to 74752, the applicants are requesting a modification to the MIH program to support the ECF standalone financing of the school construction and allow Building B in the first phase to proceed with market rate units. This modification would allow the revenues generated from the residential use within Building B in Phase 1 to be used by ECF to service the debt on the bonds issued to fund the construction of the schools within Building A, which would provide 2 new public facilities. The MIH and inclusionary housing program requirements would be fully applicable to Building C in Phase 2, which would provide approximately 200 MIH apartments. Overall, 20% of the residential floor area within the proposed project would comply with the provisions of Option 1 of the MIH program, 5% less than would be required in the absence of the modification. In addition, there's a series of other waivers that the applicants are requesting, including setback regulations along various street frontages. These waivers allow for an independent structure for the school with optional floor plates, create larger commercial floor plates, and provide a greater distance between the 2 towers, affording the unobstructed outdoor space. A waiver for lot coverage to allow up to 56.7% across the site. This waiver allows the towers to be massed on the eastern and western sides of the block and provides some flexibility in tower placement given the phased nature of the project. A full waiver of the parking requirements and a reduction in the commercial loading requirements. These requests account for the excellent transit access adjacent to the site and allow for a better site plan and layout for the schools by freeing up the ground floor and cellar floors for larger program components. A waiver to the special ground floor regulations within the special district to permit a greater variety of uses fronting along Flatbush Avenue. And lastly, a modification to the Flatbush Avenue street wall regulations to allow a portion of the street wall to be below the minimum requirement, allowing Khalil Gibran High School to have an outdoor passive recreation space. The proposed actions were certified and referred out by the department on February 29th. Community Board 2 held a public hearing on March 28th, and on May 9th, the board voted to disapprove with no conditions the zoning map change, text amendments, and the special permit. 32 in favor, 1 opposed, and 5 abstaining. In their recommendation, the Community Board elaborated on the testimony provided at the public hearing for both opposition to and support for the application. As stated in the recommendation, opponents of the application discussed inappropriate height and FAR for the location, affordability bans not serving those most in need, leading to increased gentrification, blocking the clock tower of the Williamsburg Savings Bank, reduced sunlight impacting vegetation, increased trash generation, opposition to the transfer of public land to developers, the involvement of lobbyists, disregard for the existing smokestack on site, and loading dock location. Advocates of the application discussed the following themes: the donation of cultural space, a unique community-minded project that addresses many needs, modern school facilities that add school seats to the area, and a symbol of smart development that builds housing exactly where it should be, near transit. The Borough President held a public hearing on April 30th, and we are still awaiting the recommendation, but we'll circulate that as soon as we get it. The applicants are set to present this project on Wednesday, and I can take any questions in the interim.
Questions from the commission? Okay, we'll await Wednesday then. And if there are no questions, this will go to the public hearing on Wednesday. Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Is ECF planning to be part of the testimony? I very much hope so.
Yeah, ECF and Allo Development will make up is the applicant team collectively.
Item 11 is a city council modification to 45 Broad Street, a special permit in Manhattan Community District 1. Sarah Elmore is here to discuss the modification.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a City Council mod regarding 45 Broad Street. The Commission voted to approve an application for a special permit to provide a floor area bonus of 3 FAR in connection with improvements to adjacent subway stations for proposed mixed-use development at 45 Broad Street in Manhattan Community District 1 on April 23, 2018. On June 5, 2018, the City Council Land Use Committee voted to approve the aforementioned application with modifications to the MTA restrictive declaration required in connection with the application. Specifically, the modifications are as follows. Update the MTA transit improvement drawings list for the Wall Street station improvements to ensure that all improvement drawings are in the same place. Update the MTA transit improvement drawing A212 to reflect the upgrade of existing turnstile at the southbound station. To clarify that for any DOB temporary certificate of occupancy for the core and shell of the proposed building, that it not permit the occupancy of any use. To require that the design, development, and construction drawings for the improvements include signage for the elevators at the street level, indicating where to enter for northbound service and where to enter for the southbound terminus. And to require that half the bonus floor area be located at a height above 229 feet and half be located at a height of 229 feet. The proposed modifications raise no land use and environmental issues requiring further review.
Any questions from the commission? If not, I'll ask for an assent by show of hands to send a letter to the council letting them know that the modifications are within scope. Done. Thank you.
If you say so.
Totally technical.
For June 13th, staff have prepared reports for the following landmark designations: Richard Weber Packing House, Ben Franklin High School, Public School 109, 95 Madison Avenue, Hotel Seville, Dime Savings Bank, Lewis House. Questions? Okay. Also on June 13th, staff have prepared a report for the Sunnyside Park acquisition in Queens Community District 2. And decisions are scheduled for the following South Richmond certifications, 44 Herbert Street and 34 Woodvale Avenue. Okay. A special meeting is scheduled for June 25th. Staff have prepared reports for the following items: the Inwood rezoning, the Manhattan office.
Yep, this is Inwood.
Okay.
Inwood, yes.
Yes, Sarah's going to make a brief presentation and then we can ask questions.
Great. Okay. Good afternoon again. So EDC has submitted a letter addressing several questions that were raised at the review session on May 21st, 2018. And MTA has submitted a letter recommending that the transit easement zone along Dyckman Street A train station be modified due to the site and station configuration. A vote for these applications is scheduled for June 25th, and the department is making the following recommendations for modifications. Modify the use requirements in a C62A zoning district in the Upland Wedge to permit self-storage uses as of right. Modify the special inwood district to permit sites in R8 or C62 zoning districts on waterfront blocks to receive 7.2 FAR, provided that they have either 100 feet of shoreline or enter into a legally binding agreement to build out the waterfront. To modify maximum community facility and commercial FARs in R7D districts and portions of C44D districts back to the underlying maximum FARs. To modify Type 1 streets south of 205th Street along 10th Avenue and Academy Street and south of West 204th Street along 9th Avenue to Type 2 streets. to modify the proposed 20-foot shore public walkway and requirements in the tip of Manhattan to 40 feet for parcel 2-3, and to modify the transit easement zone map to reflect MTA's recommendation. Thank you.
I want to particularly thank the commissioners for two of the changes that are noted here. One is requiring the full 40 feet of public access along the entirety of the waterfront. While being up there now, it might be a little bit hard to imagine what it could be. One need only look at what has happened in Hudson River Park or Brooklyn Bridge Park to recognize the importance of keeping this invaluable resource. And the second is particular thanks to Commissioner Ortiz for highlighting the fact that we had categorized as mandatory non-residential uses, perhaps an overly broad swath. And so in response to your concerns, we again rewalked the site block by block and determined that in certain areas it did make sense to move from type 1 to type 2. So questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Well, I just ask if we could have copies of the, are these on the dais here? No, I don't think so. No. Could you put them in our package for Friday, please?
For Wednesday.
Oh, for Wednesday. Could you maybe send them out so we can look at them beforehand?
We can send that out.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
I know one of the things that came up in the hearing was a question I asked of the gentleman from HRA about whether or not they are representing the tenants in properties where there's applications to demolish, rent stabilized properties where there's applications to demolish. And he said he was going to get back, and I don't think we've gotten that information back.
I can double check with EDC, but from what I understand, that they were, according to EDC's letter, that they were not aware of any current demolition applications in the area. But I can.
No, it's not. It's more of, do they represent in those cases?
Oh, do they represent? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can follow up with EDC.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll just note that this will be voted on, a number of items will be voted on at at a special meeting coincident with our review session because the ULURP time clock will otherwise run up.
Addition to the Inwood rezoning, the East 33rd Street rezoning, North Conduit Avenue demapping, 1019 and 1029 Fulton Street, and the Coney Island Riegelman Boardwalk landmark designation. For post-hearing.
Yes, I'm sorry, Brian, yes. Question here.
No, well, that's not your question. I just want to say that I appreciated the follow-up from the applicant team for the 33rd Street rezoning.
And I'll also note the very strong support that we have received for the Coney Island Boardwalk and a request which we were pleased to respect that we vote on the boardwalk designation before the 4th of July so that there can be festivities around that.
For post-hearing follow-up, today we have the East 14th Street and Irving Place, the Tech Hub, if that. Okay. The Kips Bay Towers parking facility, and 4031 82nd Street. Kathy Coe is here to discuss.
Hello again, Commission. A public hearing was held on May 23rd, 2018. For this project, 12 speakers provided oral testimonies in favor of the applications and 9 speakers testified in opposition. On June 4th, the applicant submitted responses to the department regarding concerns raised at the public hearing. Understanding the concerns of the Commission and the public regarding the proximity of the project area to Elmhurst Hospital, the applicant team has met with Israel Roca, the CEO of Elmhurst Hospital, on a number of occasions since the public hearing. Mr. Roca is aware of the applications and the proposed development, and the Elmhurst Hospital has not submitted testimony. And as a follow-up question to the public hearing, a letter was also provided by Thomas Gretsch, CEO of the Queens Chamber of Commerce, which is in support of the applications to confirm that the Elmhurst Hospital is a member of the Queens Chamber of Commerce, as is nearly all healthcare providers and major hospitals in Queens County. There were a number of concerns raised regarding potential traffic conflicts on Baxter Avenue as a result of the proposed development. As explained at the public hearing, the applicant proposes a 128-space attended parking garage, 48 of which are required under the proposed C45X district. Following the public hearing, the applicant team conducted additional visual data collection to provide a snapshot of bus and ambulance activity in addition to updates on the proposed parking and loading activities. So first, to further describe the bus route around this project area and the block. The Q29 bus route here is shown in blue. It runs northbound on Baxter Avenue between Ithaca Street to Hampton Street, as well as to Roosevelt Avenue, adjacent to the project site. As shown in the diagram, the closest stop is located on the southeast corner of Hampton Street and Baxter Avenue, as seen in this diagram, outlined in red. And the Q29 bus runs in both directions on Hampton Street, and when headed westbound, the bus makes a right turn onto Baxter Avenue and a slight left turn onto 83rd Street at the fork before making a left onto Roosevelt Avenue to continue circling the entire block. With the exception of Roosevelt Avenue, 82nd Street, Ithaca Street, and Baxter Avenue are all one-way roads, with Baxter Avenue 40 feet wide containing 2 travel lanes. The terminus for the 29 bus is located on 82nd Street, closer to Roosevelt Avenue, and when proceeding from its first stop, it heads down south to Glendale. The applicant has provided more detail on the parking and loading activities on Baxter Avenue with an updated site plan with additional queuing spaces for vehicles using the car elevator. According to the applicant, vehicles exiting or entering the parking garage would not obstruct the eastern travel lane on Baxter Avenue, which has 2 travel lanes, and therefore would not cause conflicts with vehicles turning onto Hampton Street, which would be traveling in the western travel lane on Baxter. The subcellar parking garage of the proposed development would be accessed by 2 car elevators operated by attendants. These car elevators typically take 2 to 3 minutes from a vehicle pulling into the garage to travel down to the subcellar and back up to accept another vehicle. There is reservoir space for 6 vehicles provided, which is intended to prevent backup onto Baxter Avenue. And the applicant states it's unlikely that all spaces would be used at once, since at least one spot needs to be free in order to allow vehicles to enter and exit the site. And this is to remain a flexible scenario with attendants using their judgment on handling vehicle capacity. Trucks accessing the 2 loading berths would drive up past the curb cut and then back into the site in one movement within the western travel lane on Baxter Avenue. A standard 30-foot-long truck backing into the loading dock would only use the western travel lane and therefore not obstruct the eastern travel lane and not cause conflicts with vehicles turning from Hampton Street. And according to additional analysis conducted by the applicant team, the project area, demand in and out of the parking lot and loading dock are relatively low and would be accommodated by what's proposed, and it would occur mainly before the PM peak traffic period of 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Target has also stated that for Target small format stores, deliveries are usually within the range of 2 to 3 per day for general merchandise, in addition to 1 food delivery. And ideally, deliveries would occur during non-peak traffic hours, avoiding morning and evening rush hours. And the applicant is working with Target and will work with other retail tenants to figure out a possible delivery service that works to minimize impact. The applicant also conducted manual turning movement counts at the intersection of Hampton Street and Baxter Avenue in September 2017 during AM and PM peak hours. The data was consistent with New York State DOT data, which estimated roughly 5,600 vehicles traveling northbound in a 24-hour period along Baxter. The additional visual data collection was collected after the public hearing on May 25th, 2018, between 3:30 p.m. to 6 p.m., which is the peak period of PM traffic on Baxter Avenue. Generally, the applicant team observed that the traffic was light and on-street parking on either side of Baxter Avenue was 50% or more vacant, filling up only after 5 p.m. A capacity analysis was conducted at the unsignalized intersection of Hampton Street and Baxter Avenue in terms of its ability to accommodate existing volumes, and it was determined that the level of service at the intersection does not hit the limit of acceptable delay. And so thus it was concluded that Hampton Street and Baxter Avenue are local streets with low traffic volumes. And in terms of pedestrian safety, the applicant determined that this is not a high crash area for pedestrians and bicyclists as per NYC DOT crash data. This slide shows the area in context of street directions. There were concerns raised at the public hearing regarding possible interference with existing ambulance activity as a result of the proposed development. As you can see here, Elmhurst Hospital's EMS Station 46 entrance is located on Baxter Avenue, 1 block south of the project area. Baxter Avenue is a two-way road at that location running north to Roosevelt Avenue and south to Broadway. At a fork in the road, which is at a triangle park just south of the project area, is where Baxter Avenue turns into a one-way road northbound. To head south, vehicles would drive south on 82nd Street past this fork, which turns into Baxter towards Broadway. According to the applicant, ambulances carrying patients to Elmhurst Hospital do not use Baxter adjacent to the site as it heads north away from the hospital. While ambulances dispatched from Elmhurst Hospital or returning to other EMS stations or private ambulance dispatch locations can turn left onto Baxter from Elmhurst Hospital to head north, it is not the only way out of EMS Station 46. Emergency vehicles can turn right onto Baxter and proceed left or right onto Broadway, which is a 4-lane, two-way road that also runs to Roosevelt Avenue in order to respond to emergency calls originating east, west, or south of the hospital. And on May 25th, during that additional visual data collection on Baxter Avenue between Ithaca Street and Roosevelt Avenue, the applicant team observed 4 ambulances driving past the project site on Baxter Avenue, none at the same time, with only one using its sirens, which is an FDNY ambulance. 2 of the 4 were private ambulances, most likely returning to holding stations at other EMS stations after making a drop at Elmhurst Hospital. It was concluded that the number of ambulances that utilize Baxter Avenue adjacent to the project area is low, and this does not appear to be the primary route out of EMS Station 46. At the public hearing, the applicant team was asked about the developer's background and experience in similar projects. The Heskel Group has been developing in Queens and Manhattan since 1975 and will be the developer of the proposed building. The Heskel Group has maintained and completed and maintained many projects, 2 of which include a project on Austin Street in Forest Hills, Queens, which is a 2-story commercial building with local and chain retail, as well as a building at 800 10th Avenue in Manhattan, which is a similarly mixed-use building with retail and residential uses. At the hearing, there were also questions about Target's established lease in the proposed development and its implications on retail uses throughout the building. Target is a confirmed tenant that would lease space in the as-of-right development as well. The memorandum of lease recorded against the proposed development includes certain prohibited uses. The purpose of these prohibitions is to exclude similar competitors and uses that are inconsistent with the neighborhood's retail environment. The applicant states that there is no intention to discriminate against or exclude small or local businesses. There are a number of types of establishments that can be located in the available retail space, such as restaurants, hair salons, coffee shops, electronic stores, clothing stores, pet shops, medical offices, and more. The following slides provides a comprehensive list of prohibited uses as stated in the memorandum of lease. Something to note is that this is the interpretation of the clauses, as the memorandum refers to sections of the lease that is not available to DCP, but to the best that we can interpret, the following is a list of prohibited uses. And I'll continue through these slides to point out just a few uses of note. Otherwise, members of the commission should have hard copies to look at more closely and to point to after the presentation. Uses such as pharmacies or groceries of any size would be prohibited unless Target does not operate such uses on the premises for a period of roughly 18 months. Since Target Expresses don't always have groceries or pharmacies as a big box type of Targets tend to, it is possible that these uses could be allowed over a period of time. In addition, beauty stores under the brand name Ulta or Sephora are also prohibited unless they are incidental sales in other stores, as well as more obvious uses such as warehouse operations that deal with assembling, manufacturing, distilling, mining, as well as any dumping, disposing, or incineration of garbage, but not applying to garbage compactors or recycling areas. Other prohibited uses could include auction or bankruptcy houses, auto sales, car washes, body shops, vet hospitals, bars or restaurants whose annual gross revenues from the sale of alcoholic beverages exceed 30% of their gross revenues, any spa fitness center exceeding 3,500 square feet of floor area, except in community facility space, any training or educational facility unless it's an incidental on-site employee training as part of conducting business, any restaurant or bar unless the establishment does not have live music or has installed sound and waterproofing, or the landlord indemnifies Target against all damages. And again, we can speak to any other uses that are of concern later on. So moving on, at the public hearing, 2 representatives from 2 separate houses of worship also mentioned the idea of a nonprofit business incubator space to occupy the community facility space in the proposed development. Since the public hearing, a letter was submitted by Bishop Mitchell Taylor, co-founder and CEO of Urban Upbound, which is a nonprofit that provides social services for residents living in public housing and other low and moderate income neighborhoods in Queens, Harlem, and the Bronx. In addition to voicing his support, the letter described a vision for a nonprofit business incubator space, which was guided by community stakeholders, seeing it fitting for this thriving commercial neighborhood. So this incubator space would be a place where small business owners and budding entrepreneurs can receive services to grow and build their businesses. And examples of services provided would be to obtain financial and tax advice, desk space with internet access, computers, business services, and assistance in finding affordable office or retail space in the neighborhood. Thank you, and I can take any questions at this time.
Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, how are you? I have to say that the hospital's lack of input is really conspicuous here. This is a Trauma 1 center. And if you look at the map, I would like the larger map. You can see that Baxter feeds onto 83rd, and that's the only northbound route between 77th and 83rd Street. And as such, it actually does get a lot of traffic. And I have to say that this report, the traffic report, also fails to mention anything with respect to Baxter and how it feeds onto 83rd Street. There's very, very little mention of 83rd. I understand Baxter is 40 feet wide. 83rd Street is not 40 feet wide. And it's where buses stop. It's a terminus. I actually was there myself. Took pictures, and during rush hour there were at least 2 buses on the right side at Baxter on 83rd Street, parking all on the left, and 1 lane of traffic. It took me 6 minutes to drive through that intersection at 11:23 in the afternoon. What? Yeah. Afternoon, 11 to 2. That time period. And I understand that's peak period, but I'm pleased that they think that only 1 ambulance in 2.5 hours passing through doesn't make a difference. But a level 1 trauma center has to meet a minimum threshold for treating severely injured patients. And for folks who are living north of the hospital, particularly in the area that's well serviced, 82nd Street, Jackson Heights is a very dense community. Those minutes and seconds can be really quite significant. I think I have a few issues. One, Target deliveries. If we were to look at how those trucks back up out of the project area, I understand they're saying you can pass the trucks on Baxter Street, but they actually block 83rd Street. And they would do so, whenever they need to go forward and back up. I'm not sure how they would back up if their car is behind the truck. I just see that that's exactly where I got caught for at that intersection for about 3 minutes, and then going north another block for about 3.5. Oh gosh. Ideally deliveries would be during non-peak periods. What kind of commitment do we have from Target that they're not going to, restrict ambulances that go through? Again, there's 1 ambulance. There are 4 ambulances that went through over 2.5 periods. 1 had its siren on. I hope none of us are at the other end of that ambulance when they need it. I can't see the hospital. I don't understand why the hospital's not weighing in here.
It's not for absence of outreach. We have reached out. They've chosen not to participate.
I understand that. And I also, there are questions that the traffic study says it does not appear to be a primary route from Elmhurst Hospital. I don't understand why the hospital isn't weighing in. We should know whether it is or it isn't, and how many ambulances are going through in order to make a decision that's going to affect public safety. In a community that, at an intersection, which is one of the only ways to get north. And, I have to say, even in this report, they say, that, ambulance is leaving. It's not even the most convenient way to get out. Ambulance is leaving. They said, it's a two-way street that also runs to Roosevelt Avenue, and in order to respond to emergency calls originating east, west, and south of the hospital. What about calls originating north of the hospital? I'm glad there's no mention of getting north of the hospital here. There are many people who live north of the hospital who would be affected by the inability to get there easily. So that alone causes significant issues for me. I have to say, I don't have issues with the density. It's a transit-oriented location. That's not the issue here. It absolutely is public safety. And without the hospital weighing in one way or another, just to inform us of their practices, how can we make a decision that would impact the ability of any of us? And I'm one of those people who would be, in fact, impacted, with the challenges associated with this, because the hospital is one block to the left. So I hope that we all take that into consideration as we make our determinations.
If I might note, one way we've been grappling with these issues is that the request before us is for rezoning. So it's not like a large scale where we could or a special permit where we could put more conditions on it. What we can do is note in the report, I think, the very significant and serious issues that you've raised. And as we know, the council has a far broader remit than we do. And I think that we can signal concerns. I picked up, as you did, on the fact that with respect to loading movements, it said ideally. There's a difference between ideally and a council-imposed commitment requirement to have loading during non-peak hours. So I would think that we have the ability through our report to send a message about these considerations. And again, with respect to the hospital, it is not for absence of trying. It has been a conscious decision not to participate.
And that's, I understand they have the right, but I do feel that it makes it very challenging to make a decision on this land use absent some very basic information with respect to life safety.
Commissioner Deleuze.
I just really appreciate Commissioner Ortiz's bringing up these items and highlighting them. I mean, I think the testimony also did a very good job of that. I think the folks that came were very thoughtful. I'm just wondering if we happen to know since the hearing, if I guess I was a bit dismayed that at the hearing it was reported that the owner hadn't met with the local community group who was obviously very organized. And I'm just wondering if we happen to have any further information about that.
To my knowledge, they have not met, but it's not necessarily one-sided, one not wanting to meet with the other. I think they're just not really communicating much.
I guess it would be helpful if the applicant would respond to that. Okay.
I think we do have time, so we can reach out again. Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Well, I certainly came away from the hearing with the same feeling of dismay that Commissioner Deleuze mentioned. I share the traffic concerns, but unlike Commissioner Ortiz, I'm also very concerned about the density of sought for this location. It's basically a doubling of the residential density and a doubling of the commercial density. And as one of the less impassioned members of the community characterized it, it's an affront to the character of the surrounding area. And I've been persuaded to go along on projects where I thought the density was out of scale, where the community has engaged with the developer and has thought about these issues and has concluded that there are significant community benefits in, although I hate that phrase, there are significant advantages to the community that they would be receiving in exchange for what might otherwise be considered out of scale development. But I mean, here, the fact that the applicant didn't testify, the applicant didn't come speak to us, the traffic study seemed inadequate, there didn't seem to be any community engagement, leaves me really looking closely at the difference between the as-of-right alternative and what is being sought here. And the difference really is between as-of-right and what they're seeking. It's 4 stories or 51 feet in height. It's second floor commercial use, so a doubling of the intensity of commercial use. It's a total of 43 additional dwelling units, but only 24 total affordable dwelling units. And looking at this, I just have a hard time concluding that for 24 affordable housing units under the mandatory program, that all of these other burdens are an appropriate price. I think it's, right now, it's seeming to me like a pretty high price to pay for 24 mandatory units.
That actually was a question that was posed to the mayor at the town hall in the district. And as the mayor pointed out, more sharply than I ever would to you, Commissioner Levin, he noted that the residents of those 24 units might think differently about it. And I will note, just from the department's perspective, that we believe that we agree with Commissioner Ortiz that the density, that the scale is appropriate. Certainly my remaining concerns are with respect to the traffic pattern as identified by Commissioner Ortiz. But we will reach back out again to the applicant for a follow-up on the questions that both commissioners have raised. Yes, Kelly.
Yes, I also have, I'm very troubled by the traffic situation there. And I agree with Commissioner Levin that the transportation consultant left a lot to be desired. Not knowing prior to the presentation what buses ran along the route, if any. There was testimony, or there was at least comments from the audience that there were multiple buses at that location, and yet the response that we got today seemed to indicate that there was only one. So I was wondering if we could verify the bus activity along that route.
I can do that.
We have our adjunct city planner.
The Q29 loops around that site and then comes back and loops in the other direction. So it's actually, you know, it sort of goes around this site in both directions. So you have some buses going, you know, north and some buses going south because they're all going down Hampton Street, you know? So I think that might have been why they were talking about multiple buses, but it's one
They were
it's one
talking
bus
about,
route.
they said that there were multiple routes.
There are routes on Roosevelt and the right route. I was just looking at the bus map, that's why. It's just the Q29.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the only one that actually goes around the entire project site. There are very close, other bus routes in very close proximity.
Yeah, it's the same.
Other questions? Okay, so we will bring this back at our next review session.
Thank you.
Yes.
When are we going to vote on this?
I think that we have this on for the, well, we could possibly vote it out on the June 27th hearing, but we can, I think, have time for, there's I think July 9th is the last day. If we were so inclined, we can hold a special hearing.
A special meeting on the day of a review session.
Review session.
Okay, yes.
One last comment. The other issue is the parking. I mean, we're okay with the density. It's a transit-oriented location, but they're requiring, or they're providing much more parking than is required. And I know that that's allowed under zoning, but I do think this is something to flag. If we are serious about sustainability, thinking about how, because these overlays, these commercial overlays at transit locations often don't reflect the transit availability, and they have, the parking requirements. They're either requirements are either too high, or people can provide much more. I think it's worth thinking about in the future, because this site with the 2 elevators, each of which is going to take 2 to 3 minutes to load, and they're 128 spots, creates a whole nother issue. And if they were restricted to what they were required to, I would feel a lot more comfortable as well.
A question based on your local knowledge. Is on-street parking at a premium? Is there a desire among some in the neighborhood for off-street parking? Or is there generally an availability of on-street for those who do have cars?
There's definitely a demand for off-street parking among residents, for sure. There should be noted that there are national chains located here to the north on 82nd Street. None have parking, and they absolutely function very well. And in fact, they're growing. So, it's not necessary for the retail, but certainly residents want them. But we would think that if someone chooses to locate half a block from a transit stop, we can encourage them to use transit and not necessarily create more of a traffic situation because they own a car. This should be for people who don't need cars.
It's interesting to hear an approach that Commissioner Levin and I frequently share in Manhattan be expressed in a transit-rich neighborhood in another borough. Okay, so this will be back 2 weeks from now.
Yep. All right. Absent any other business, this concludes the City Planning Commission review session for June 11th, 2018. The time is 4:16.
Yeah, we'll move it.